This video will help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like to know which city you're from and what time you're watching this. Now, subscribe to the channel, relax, and let's begin. We'd been there maybe 8 months when my little brother Tommy, who was only 6 at the time, came into the kitchen one morning looking confused. Mom asked him what was wrong, and he said so casually, "The girl with glasses was looking in Becca's window last night." Mom froze. Dad looked up from his coffee. I remember the way they exchanged that look parents do when they're trying not to freak out in front of the kids. "What girl, honey?" Mom asked, keeping her voice super calm. "The one with the hair to here," Tommy said, pointing to his shoulders. "She was just standing there looking in." My bedroom was on the 2nd floor. Dad went outside immediately to check, but there were no footprints, no ladder, nothing that could explain how anyone could have been looking in my window. My parents called it a bad dream and told Tommy not to worry, but I remember lying awake that night staring at my window, wondering if someone was going to appear. Nothing happened for a few weeks. Then my sister Abigail and I decided to switch rooms. Her room was slightly bigger, but mine got better light in the mornings. We were both in middle school by then, and I wanted the better lighting for doing my makeup before school, though I barely knew how to use mascara properly. The first night in my new room, Abigail's old one, is when things got weird. I was almost asleep when I heard it. 3 distinct knocks on the window, not like a branch hitting glass, but deliberate. Knock, knock, knock. I sat bolt upright, heart racing. The window in this room was even higher up than my old one, probably 9 feet off the ground outside. There's no way anyone could reach it without a serious ladder. I was too terrified to look. I just yanked the covers over my head and eventually fell asleep from pure exhaustion. The next morning, I convinced myself it was just the house settling or something. 3 nights later, Abigail was hanging out in my room while I was doing homework. We were just talking about school stuff when we both heard it. The same 3 knocks on the window. Knock, knock, knock. We froze and stared at each other. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. Abigail nodded, her face pale. "What the hell was that?" We both looked at the window, but there was nothing there, just darkness. Dad checked outside again the next day. Nothing. No tree branches near the window, no way for anyone to reach it without equipment. After that, I started noticing other things. One afternoon I was doing homework at my desk when my school papers started rustling. I thought it was my cat Milo at first, but he was curled up on my bed across the room. There wasn't any draft. The window was closed, the door was closed, the heat wasn't on. The papers just moved on their own. When I told Abigail about it, her face got all weird. She admitted that when that had been her room, she'd seen pencils move across her desk by themselves. Not roll, move, like someone had picked them up and set them down somewhere else. We started keeping track after that. Kitchen cabinets would be closed when we went to bed and open in the morning. The bathroom door would swing open when nobody was near it. The TV in the living room would turn off randomly, or the volume would suddenly crank up. My parents tried to explain it all away. Old house, uneven foundation, electrical issues. But they started to believe something was up too, especially after what happened with the cable box. I was 16 by then, watching TV alone one night when the cable box suddenly shut off. The TV was still on, but no signal. I'd dealt with so much weird stuff by then that I wasn't even scared anymore, just annoyed. "Seriously," I said out loud, rolling my eyes. "Turn it back on, Rosie." Wait, I should explain the name. We started calling her Rosie after Tommy said he saw the girl again when he was 7. He said she told him her name was Rosie. Mom and Dad got really worried then and had Tommy talk to a child psychologist, but they said he was fine, just had an active imagination, but the name stuck. Anyway, the moment I said, "Turn it back on, Rosie," the cable box powered up again. Not just turned on, it skipped the whole boot-up process and went straight to the channel I'd been watching. I remember feeling ice cold all over, despite it being the middle of summer. I ran upstairs and found my mom folding laundry. The ghost just turned the cable box back on when I asked her to. I blurted out. Mom stopped folding. Rebecca, there's no ghost. Then how do you explain what just happened, or all the other stuff? Tommy seeing the girl, the knocking, things moving? She sat down on her bed and sighed. I don't know. But ghosts aren't real. The thing is, I could tell she didn't believe what she was saying. Not completely. A few years passed. I graduated high school, went to community college, and started dating Jordan. When I was 22, he moved in with us temporarily while looking for his own place. Jordan was the ultimate skeptic. He laughed at our ghost stories and called Rosie our imaginary roommate. Until the baby toys incident. We were cleaning out the basement because Mom wanted to turn it into a proper bedroom. There was a box of Tommy's old baby toys that somehow got missed when we donated his stuff years ago. Jordan was going through it, making jokes about how ancient the toys looked. He picked up this little plastic piano that was supposed to play songs when you pressed the keys. Does this even work anymore? He asked, pressing a key. Nothing happened. The batteries had been dead for years. He set it back in the box and turned to grab some trash bags. That's when the piano played a note, a single, clear note. Jordan spun around so fast he almost fell over. What the hell? I was across the room and hadn't touched it. That's Rosie saying hi, I said, trying to sound casual, though my heart was racing. That's bullshit. The batteries are just corroded or something, he said. He grabbed the piano again and tried pressing keys. Nothing happened. He turned it over to check the battery compartment. The batteries were completely leaked, crusty with that white powder dead batteries get. There was no way they could power anything. Jordan didn't talk much the rest of the day. That night, we were sleeping in my room when we heard loud thumping from the attic above, then footsteps moving back and forth. What is that? Jordan whispered. Probably Rosie, I said. She gets active sometimes at night. There's no such thing as ghosts, he said, but his voice was shaking. The footsteps got louder, right above our heads. Can you shut up? Jordan suddenly yelled at the ceiling. I'm trying to sleep. Everything went silent for about 10 seconds. Then the loudest bang we'd ever heard came from directly above us, like someone had dropped a bowling ball. Jordan didn't stay with us much longer after that. He found his own place within 2 weeks. We're still together, but he refuses to talk about what happened. Last year, my mom decided to move her bedroom to the basement since Tommy was away at college and it was just her and Dad at home most of the time. She'd fixed it up nice. New carpet, fresh paint, proper lighting. About a month after moving down there, she called me sounding rattled. I saw something last night, she said. What do you mean? I woke up around 3 in the morning and there was a light. The night light? Mom always kept a small night light in her room. No, it was floating above my dresser, like a ball of light but dim, kind of glowing. It hovered there for maybe 10 seconds, then it just faded away. Coming from my mom, this was huge. She'd always been the most skeptical, always trying to find rational explanations. Do you think it was Rosie? I asked. There was a long pause. I don't know what it was, she finally said. But I'm not scared. It didn't feel threatening. And that's the weird thing about our ghost. In all these years, through all these strange experiences, none of us have ever felt like Rosie meant us harm. It's like she's just there, existing alongside us, making her presence known in little ways. We've researched the history of the house but found nothing unusual. No tragic deaths, no missing children. The house was built in the 1970s and had only 2 previous owners, both older couples who moved to retirement communities. I'm 25 now and have my own apartment, but I still visit home regularly. Things still happen. Objects move, doors open and close, electronics act up. Tommy swears he still sees her sometimes, standing at the foot of his bed when he's home from college. He says she looks about 12 or 13 with those same glasses and shoulder-length hair. My dad built shelves in the garage last month. When he came in for dinner, all his tools had been arranged in a perfect circle on his workbench. He just sighed and said, "Thanks for the help, Rosie." Just last week, I was staying over in my old room. I woke up around 2 in the morning feeling like someone was watching me. The air felt different, heavier somehow, like right before a thunderstorm. I opened my eyes and saw nothing, but I could feel a presence in the room. "Hi, Rosie," I whispered. My phone, which was charging on the nightstand, suddenly lit up. The screen showed it was playing music, though no sound came out. It was on a song called Rose Garden. I wasn't even scared. After 15 years, Rosie just feels like a weird part of our family. A permanent house guest who occasionally messes with the electronics and moves things around. I've told this story to friends over the years, and they always ask why we didn't move out or call ghost hunters or a priest or something. The truth is, it just never felt necessary. Rosie never hurt anyone. She's just there. Sometimes I wonder who she was or why she's in our house. Was she a previous owner's child who died young, someone who lived on the land before the house was built, or something else entirely? I don't have answers. All I know is that in our house in Pinewood, there's a girl named Rosie with glasses and shoulder-length hair who likes to knock on windows, move objects, and occasionally fix the cable when asked nicely. And somehow, that's just become our normal, Story 2. I still can't sleep properly. It's been 3 weeks since that night, and every time I hear rain on the roof or see lightning flash outside my window, I break into a cold sweat. My son Arthur doesn't want to watch storms anymore. Our special tradition is ruined, probably forever. I've always loved thunderstorms. There's something primal about watching nature unleash its raw power while you sit somewhere safe and dry. When Arthur was around 3, I noticed he wasn't afraid of thunder like most kids. Instead, he was fascinated by it, so I started taking him out to our backyard gazebo whenever a storm rolled in. It became our thing, just dad and son, watching the lightning dance across the sky, counting seconds between flash and boom to see how close the storm was getting. Our house in Oak Ridge backs up to a dense stretch of woods. It was one of the main selling points when we bought the place 5 years ago. My wife Elaine loves the privacy, and I appreciate having nature right in our backyard. Arthur loves exploring the edge of the tree line, though we've always had a strict rule about not going into the woods alone. Last month, August 12th to be exact, the weather forecast predicted a massive summer storm system moving through our area. Arthur had been asking all day when the sky show would start. Around 7 in the evening, I noticed the clouds building up on the horizon, dark and heavy with that greenish tint that usually means a good one is coming. "Storm's rolling in, buddy." "Want to head out to the gazebo?" I asked Arthur. His face lit up immediately. "Yes, can I bring my flashlight?" I nodded and he raced to get it from his room. I packed us some snacks, apple slices and peanut butter crackers, and grabbed a couple of blankets just in case it got chilly with the storm front. I also brought my phone to check the radar and make sure we weren't going to get caught in anything too dangerous. The gazebo sits about 30 yards from our back door, near the edge of our property where the mowed lawn meets the beginning of the woods. It's nothing fancy, just a wooden structure with bench seating and a solid roof, but it gives us the perfect vantage point to watch storms roll across the sky. Arthur was buzzing with excitement as we settled in. The wind had already picked up, making the trees sway and creak along the forest edge. The first few raindrops began to fall, fat and heavy, spattering on the gazebo roof. "It's going to be a big one, Dad," Arthur said, practically bouncing on the bench. He was right. Within minutes, the sky darkened dramatically, and the rain intensified. Lightning started flashing in the distance, followed by the low rumble of thunder. Arthur counted out loud, 1 1,000, 2 1,000, 3 1,000, 7 seconds. The storm was still a bit away, but definitely heading our way. I remember checking my phone. It was 7:32 when I first noticed something felt off. The hair on my arms stood up, and it wasn't from the electricity in the air. I had this sudden, inexplicable feeling that we were being watched. I scanned the yard, then looked toward the house, half expecting to see Elaine watching us from the kitchen window. She wasn't there. She was at her sister's place for the evening. Then my eyes drifted to the edge of the woods. That's when I saw it. a figure standing just beyond the tree line, partially obscured by the trunks and underbrush. At first I thought it might be a neighbor, maybe someone out walking who got caught in the storm, but something about the way it stood, completely still despite the wind and rain, made my stomach knot up. I was about to point it out to Arthur when he tugged on my sleeve. "Dad, who's that man in the trees?" My blood ran cold. Arthur had seen it too. This wasn't my imagination. "Stay here, buddy," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm going to go see if they need help." Arthur's face scrunched with worry. "But it's raining hard." "I know, I'll be quick." I ruffled his hair. "Don't leave the gazebo, okay? Promise me." He nodded solemnly. "I promise." I stepped out into the rain, instantly getting soaked. The storm had really picked up now, with lightning flashing every few seconds. I walked toward the tree line, squinting through the downpour. "Hello?" I called out. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" No response. The figure remained motionless. I got closer, maybe 15 feet from the trees now. I could see that whoever it was wore some kind of dark hooded garment. Their face was completely shadowed by the hood. "Hey, can you hear me?" I shouted over the rain. That's when it happened. The figure moved, but not like a person should move. It was too fast, too fluid. 1 second it was there, and the next it had slipped behind a large oak tree. I rushed forward a few more steps, peering into the woods. Nothing. Whoever or whatever it was had vanished. No sound of footsteps, no rustling of underbrush. Just gone. A particularly bright flash of lightning made me jump, followed almost immediately by a deafening crack of thunder. The storm was right on top of us now. I hurried back to the gazebo where Arthur sat wide-eyed. "Who was it, Dad?" he asked. "Probably just someone taking a shortcut through the woods," I lied, trying to sound casual. "They're gone now, probably running home to get out of this crazy rain." Arthur didn't look convinced, but another booming thunderclap distracted him. I must have fallen asleep eventually, because the next thing I knew I was jolted awake by Arthur's voice. "Dad! Dad!" I sat up, groggy and disoriented. The digital clock on my nightstand read 2:17 a.m. I could hear Arthur calling from his room. "Dad, the man from the woods is outside my window." I was instantly wide awake, heart pounding. I rushed to Arthur's room and found him standing on his bed, pointing at his window. The curtains were open, and outside, illuminated by a flash of lightning, I saw it. The hooded figure was standing in our backyard, much closer to the house now, maybe 20 feet from Arthur's window. Despite the darkness, I could make out pale features within the hood, and eyes, cold, unblinking eyes that seemed to glow with their own faint light. They were fixed directly on Arthur's window. "Get away from the window," I whispered, pulling Arthur back. "Get under your bed right now." He scrambled down without argument. I grabbed the baseball bat I keep in the hall closet and went to the back door. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely unlock it. Part of me was screaming to stay inside, to call the police. But another part, the protective father part, needed to confront whatever was threatening my son. I stepped out onto the back porch. The rain had almost stopped, but the air felt charged, heavy with electricity and something else I couldn't name. I gripped the bat tighter. "Who are you?" I shouted. "What do you want? Get off my property now." The figure remained motionless for several seconds, then, just like before, moved with that unsettling, too-fast fluidity. Only this time it didn't retreat to the woods. It darted to the side, disappearing around the corner of the house. I ran after it, bat raised. I checked all around the house, the side yards, the front yard, even looked under the porch. Nothing. It had vanished again, without footprints or any sign of its presence. I went back inside, locking every door and window, and called the police. They arrived 20 minutes later and searched the property, but found nothing. The officer was sympathetic, but clearly thought I'd seen a prowler or maybe just shadows playing tricks in the storm. They promised to patrol the area more frequently for the next few days. Arthur slept in my bed that night. The next morning, I searched our property in daylight. No footprints in the mud, No broken branches where the figure had stood in the woods. Nothing. Elaine came home that afternoon, and I told her everything. She was worried, suggested maybe it was stress, or that Arthur and I had spooked each other with our imaginations. I almost started to believe her. Until that evening, Arthur was in the bath and Elaine was washing dishes. I went out to the gazebo one last time, trying to make sense of what had happened. The evening was clear with just a few scattered clouds, no sign of the previous night's tempest. Standing there in the quiet, I felt a slight movement in the air. Not wind, something else. I turned toward the woods and saw the branches at the edge swaying, as if something had just passed through them. For a split second, I thought I glimpsed that same dark shape moving between the trees, deeper into the forest. I backed away, returning to the house. I haven't used the gazebo since. Arthur doesn't ask to watch storms anymore, and I've installed security cameras all around our property. But cameras and locks won't help, I think. Whatever visited us that night wasn't a normal intruder. Sometimes when it rains, I catch Arthur staring out the window with a knowing look that no 6-year-old should have. And sometimes, when the thunder is particularly loud, I could swear I hear something tapping on the glass, like raindrops, but with a rhythm that's too deliberate, too purposeful. Whatever was watching us from the woods that night, I know it's still out there, and I know somehow that it's waiting for the next big storm to come. Story 3. I still can't explain what happened to me 2 months ago. I've always been a logical person, but this experience has left me questioning everything I thought I knew about the natural world. I'm hoping that by sharing this, someone might have an explanation that makes sense. For context, I'd been working 70-hour weeks at my marketing job for almost 8 months straight. Downtown, living with constant construction, traffic noise, and neighbors who thought 3 a.m. was the perfect time to rearrange furniture had left me completely drained. I hadn't had a decent night's sleep in weeks, and my doctor was concerned about my blood pressure. When my boss rejected my vacation request for the 3rd time, something in me just snapped. I walked out, turned off my phone, and decided I needed complete isolation to reset. I found this cabin rental online, 5 hours north, deep in the woods, advertised as a digital detox retreat. The listing was honest about having no Wi-Fi or cell service, which was exactly what I wanted. The photos showed a rustic 2-story cabin made of dark timber with a wide porch that sagged slightly on one side. It looked peaceful, surrounded by dense forest with just a small clearing around it. The owner seemed relieved when I booked for a full week in October. Apparently most people only stayed for weekends. The drive up was therapeutic. I watched as buildings gave way to farmland, then farmland to increasingly dense forest. The last 40 minutes were on a narrow gravel road that twisted through trees that had just started to turn golden and red. When I finally arrived, the cabin looked exactly like the photos, maybe a bit more weathered but charming in its isolation. The first day was bliss. I arrived around noon, unpacked my supplies, and spent the afternoon just sitting on that sagging porch, listening to nothing but wind through the trees. I actually dozed off in the chair, something that hadn't happened naturally in months. That night, I slept like the dead for almost 10 hours straight. I woke up early the next morning feeling more refreshed than I had in years. After a simple breakfast, I decided to explore the woods around the property. The owner had left a crude hand-drawn map showing a few trails, and I took the one that supposedly led to a small stream. The forest was dense but beautiful, tall pines mixed with oak and maple trees in full autumn color. The morning air had that crisp, earthy smell that you just don't get in the city. I found the stream exactly where the map indicated and sat on a rock watching the clear water bubble over stones for almost an hour. When I returned to the cabin around midday, I made some coffee and took it out to the porch. That's when I first noticed it. A large dog standing at the edge of the clearing, maybe 50 yards away. It was a brown and black shepherd mix, I think, though something about its proportions seemed slightly off. Too lean in some places, too bulky in others. What struck me was how absolutely still it was standing. No tail wagging, no shifting weight between paws like normal dogs do. It just watched me. I'm not afraid of dogs. I grew up with them. so I called out, "Hey buddy, you lost." My voice seemed to disappear into the trees without echo. The dog didn't react at all. It just kept staring at me with an intensity that started to feel uncomfortable. After maybe 2 minutes of this strange standoff, it simply turned and walked into the trees, disappearing completely. I figured it was probably a stray, or maybe belonged to someone living further out in the woods. I went back inside, made dinner, and spent the evening reading by the fireplace. That night, I slept soundly again, though I had strange dreams I couldn't quite remember in the morning. When I stepped outside the next day, I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. There were paw prints in the soft earth, large ones, that circled the entire cabin. They hadn't been there the previous evening. I followed them around the perimeter, and it was clear that whatever made them had walked a complete circuit around the house, pausing longer at the doors and windows. The prints were deep, indicating a heavy animal. I told myself it was just curious, but something about those methodical tracks put me on edge. Throughout the day, I kept glancing out the windows, expecting to see the dog again. I brought the axe from the woodpile inside, keeping it near me as I moved around the cabin. Just a precaution, I told myself, though I felt slightly ridiculous for being unnerved by a stray dog. That night, I woke up suddenly at midnight. The digital clock on my nightstand cast a red glow across the bedroom. Something had pulled me from sleep, but I couldn't identify what until I heard it again. A slow, deliberate scratching at the front door, not frantic like an animal trying to get in from the cold, but methodical. Scratch, pause, scratch, pause, as if testing the strength of the wood. I lay frozen in bed, straining to hear. The scratching continued for maybe 5 minutes, then stopped. After about 10 minutes of silence, I heard what sounded like heavy paws on the porch steps, then nothing. I didn't sleep again that night. At dawn, I cautiously opened the front door. More paw prints covered the porch, and there were long scratch marks down the door, about 3 feet up from the ground. They were deep gouges in the wood, splintering at the edges. Whatever made them had considerable strength. Later that afternoon, I saw the dog again. This time it was standing closer to the cabin, maybe 30 yards away. In the better light, I could see its coat was matted in places, with bare patches showing skin that looked oddly textured. Its posture remained unnaturally still. It didn't pant or twitch an ear or show any of the normal small movements that dogs make. Just those eyes, fixed on me with an intensity that felt purposeful. I shouted at it this time, waving my arms to scare it off. It didn't flinch or bark back. After a long, uncomfortable moment, it slowly backed away into the trees, never turning its back to me. That night, I barricaded the door with the small dining table and kept the axe beside my bed. Around 2 in the morning, I heard the scratching again. Slow at first, then more insistent. Then something new, a sound like a heavy body pressing against the walls, circling the cabin. I could track its progress by the creaking of the timber as it moved around the structure. When it reached the bedroom wall, I heard a low sound, not quite a growl, more like a hum that vibrated through the logs. It stayed there, pressing against my wall for what felt like hours. The next morning revealed more prints, smears of mud on the glass of the windows, and, most disturbingly, dark fur stuck to the rough wooden exterior walls in patches, as if the animal had been rubbing itself against the cabin deliberately. For 2 nights after that, nothing happened. No scratching, no prints, no sightings of the dog. I started to relax, thinking maybe it had moved on. I considered leaving early, but convinced myself I was overreacting. It was just a stray dog with odd behavior, nothing supernatural or threatening. I needed this break, and I wasn't going to let an animal chase me away. On what was supposed to be my final morning, I woke up early to pack. As I looked out the bedroom window, something caught my eye at the edge of the clearing. There was a patch of grass that had been flattened in a roughly circular shape, as if something had been lying there for hours. Next to it was a stump, and stuck to the rough bark were tufts of coarse, dark fur. The position offered a perfect view of my bedroom window. It had been watching me sleep. That was it. I threw my belongings into my car in record time, not even bothering to clean up or check out properly. As I was loading the last bag, I glanced toward the tree line and saw movement. Just a shadow shifting between trunks, but I knew it was there. Watching, waiting. I drove away as the sun was just clearing the treetops, taking the gravel roads too fast, sending stones flying. I didn't stop until I reached the highway, where I pulled over and had what I can only describe as a panic attack. My hands shaking so badly I couldn't hold my water bottle. I've been back in the city for 2 months now. I found a new job, one with reasonable hours. I should feel safe here, surrounded by people and concrete and street lights. But sometimes, in the middle of the night, I wake up suddenly, convinced I hear that slow, deliberate scratching at my apartment door. I lie there, frozen, listening to the silence, wondering what that thing in the woods really was, because the more I think about it, the more I'm certain it wasn't just a dog. I check my locks twice every night now, and I keep a baseball bat beside my bed, because deep down, I can't shake the feeling that whatever was watching me in those woods knows where I live now. Story 4. I still get chills when I think about that old house in the woods. It's been about 15 years since it happened, but the memory feels as fresh as yesterday. I've tried to rationalize it a million times, but I've never found an explanation that makes sense. This all happened when I was 12. My parents had bought this small cabin in the Catskills as a weekend getaway spot, about 3 hours north of NYC. The place wasn't anything fancy, just a 2-bedroom cabin with a small kitchen and living room, but it was our escape from city life. My dad would take Friday afternoons off work, and we'd drive up after school to spend the weekend hiking, fishing, or just sitting around the fire pit at night. During our 3rd weekend there, I got bored and decided to explore the woods behind our cabin. My parents told me not to go too far, but what 12-year-old actually listens to that kind of advice? I remember it was early October, and the leaves were just starting to change. The woods were beautiful, all gold and red, but I wasn't really there for the scenery. I was looking for adventure. I must have walked about 100 yards or so when I first spotted it through the trees. An old house, way bigger than our cabin, just sitting there in a small clearing. I froze when I saw it, not out of fear exactly, but more from surprise. Nobody had mentioned there were other houses nearby, especially not abandoned ones. The place was a wreck. The roof had partially caved in on one side, and the wooden exterior was gray and rotting. Vines crawled up the walls, and the porch sagged like it might collapse if you stepped on it wrong. What really caught my attention, though, was the car in the overgrown driveway, an old Ford Fairlane, probably from the 60s, completely rusted out with flat tires and broken windows. It looked like it had been sitting there for decades. I approached cautiously, half expecting someone to yell at me for trespassing, but the place was dead silent except for birds and the wind in the trees. The windows were filthy, covered with decades of grime, but intact. I cupped my hands against one to peer inside and could make out sheet-covered furniture, an old wooden staircase, and what looked like picture frames still hanging on the walls. I was both terrified and fascinated. Who had lived here? Why did they leave everything behind? Why hadn't anyone torn the place down, or at least cleared it out? When I got back to the cabin, I told my parents about my discovery. Dad seemed concerned, mostly about safety hazards, but admitted he hadn't known about any abandoned properties in the area. Mom just told me to stay away from it, warning about collapsing floors and tetanus. For the next few weekends, I kept my distance, but I couldn't stop thinking about that house. There was something about it that pulled at me. I'd find myself staring into the woods from our back deck, knowing it was out there, waiting. About a month later, my cousin Max came up with us for the weekend. Max was also 12, but unlike me, he was fearless to the point of being reckless. When I told him about the abandoned house, his eyes lit up immediately. "We have to check it out," he insisted. My parents had gone into town for groceries that Saturday morning, so Max and I grabbed our paintball guns. We'd been allowed to bring them to shoot at targets in the backyard and headed into the woods. Max brought his backpack with flashlights, some snacks, and other exploration gear, as he called it. The house looked exactly the same as when I'd found it. Max whistled when he saw it. "This place is awesome," he said, immediately heading toward the porch. I hung back, suddenly unsure. We shouldn't go inside. The floor might collapse. Max tested the porch with one foot. It creaked but held. "We don't have to go all the way in. Let's just peek through the windows." We circled the house, looking through every window we could reach. The interior was exactly as I remembered. Sheet-covered furniture, dusty floors, and an eerie stillness that felt like the house was holding its breath. When we got to the back of the house, Max nudged me. "Bet you can't hit that window from here," he challenged, raising his paintball gun. "My parents would kill me," I said, but I could feel myself giving in to the idea. "They'll never know," Max argued. "This place has been abandoned for forever. Nobody cares." Before I could object further, Max fired. A bright blue splat appeared on the window. The glass didn't break. It was one of those old, thick panes, but the paint stood out vividly against the filthy surface. "Your turn," Max grinned. I hesitated, then aimed and fired. My red paintball hit right next to his blue one. It felt wrong, but also exhilarating. What started as a few test shots quickly escalated. We began shooting at all the windows, competing to see who could make the most impressive patterns. The thrill of doing something forbidden took over, and soon we were running around the house, firing at every window we could see. The old glass was surprisingly sturdy, but eventually we hit one window hard enough that it cracked with a satisfying sound. "Bullseye!" Max shouted. That was all it took. Suddenly, our goal shifted from decorating the windows with paint to breaking them. We targeted the cracked window until it finally shattered, sending glass fragments tinkling to the ground. The sound was both terrifying and thrilling. We broke every window we could reach. Some took multiple hits, while others gave way easily. By the time we were done, the house looked even more decrepit, with jagged glass framing each window and colorful paint splatters everywhere. "My dad's gonna wonder where all our paintballs went," I said, suddenly worried as the adrenaline wore off. Max shrugged. "Tell him we were bad shots. Come on, let's get out of here before your parents get back." We ran back to the cabin, hiding our paintball guns and acting innocent when my parents returned. That night, I had trouble sleeping. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those broken windows and felt a mixture of guilt and unease. 2 weekends passed before we returned to the cabin. Max came along again, and naturally we wanted to see the aftermath of our vandalism. My parents had gone hiking, giving us the perfect opportunity to sneak back to the abandoned house. The path through the woods felt familiar now, and we chatted excitedly about what we might find. Maybe someone had discovered the damage and boarded up the windows, or maybe animals had gotten in through the broken glass. When we finally reached the clearing, we fell silent. The house stood exactly as before, gray, rotting, partially collapsed, but something was wrong, very wrong. The windows were intact, all of them. Not just unbroken, but completely untouched. No paint splatters, no cracks, nothing. They were still filthy and covered with cobwebs, exactly as they had been when I first discovered the house. "What the hell?" Max whispered, approaching one of the windows we had definitely broken. "Did we imagine it?" "No way," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "We broke every single one. You know we did." Max touched the glass cautiously, as if expecting his hand to pass through it. "Someone replaced them. Has to be." But that made no sense. Who would replace windows in a house with a caved-in roof? And how had they cleaned off all the paint without disturbing the decades of dust and cobwebs? The windows looked exactly as they had when I first found the place, aged, filthy, but intact. "Maybe we went to the wrong house," Max suggested, though we both knew that was impossible. The rusty Ford Fairlane was still in the driveway, exactly as before. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. "Let's do it again," I said, pulling out my paintball gun. I needed to prove to myself that this was real, that we hadn't imagined the whole thing. Max hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, let's mark them so we know for sure next time." We were more methodical this time. We shot specific patterns, initials, X marks, smiley faces, onto certain windows before breaking them. We even took pictures with Max's disposable camera to document it. By the time we finished, the house looked just as destroyed as it had before, but now we had proof. Neither of us talked much on the way back to the cabin. Something about the situation felt deeply wrong, and I think we both knew it. Winter came, and our weekend trips became less frequent. My dad didn't like driving in the snow, and the cabin wasn't well insulated for the colder months. Max and I didn't talk much about the house, but I know he thought about it as much as I did. The photos from his camera had shown exactly what we remembered: broken windows and paint splatters everywhere. It wasn't until early spring, about 4 months later, that we returned to the cabin as a family. Max came along again, and as soon as our parents were occupied, we headed straight for the woods. "It's going to be fixed again," I said as we walked. "I know it will be." Max didn't argue. I think he expected it too. But what we found was worse than repaired windows. The house was gone. Not just the windows, the entire structure. Where the old house had stood was nothing but a pile of overgrown rubble. Rotting timber, broken bricks, and rusted metal were scattered across the clearing, partially covered by early spring vegetation. The only recognizable feature was the Ford Fairlane, still sitting in what used to be the driveway, now surrounded by young saplings. It looked like the house had been demolished years ago, not months. Plants had grown through and around the debris in a way that would have taken seasons, not weeks. Max and I stood there in silence, trying to process what we were seeing. "Could someone have torn it down?" Max finally asked. "And hauled away most of the debris in the middle of winter through these woods with no road access?" I shook my head. "And look at the plants growing through everything. That takes time." We walked carefully through what remained of the house, trying to match the layout to our memories. Nothing made sense. It was as if the house had been gone for years, not months. Before we left, I spotted something half buried in the soil, a shard of glass, thick and old-fashioned, like the windows of the house had been. I picked it up, thinking it might be proof that the house had really existed. But when I showed it to Max later at the cabin, it had transformed into a smooth, ordinary stone. I'm 27 now, and I've never been able to explain what happened. Sometimes I wonder if Max and I shared some kind of hallucination, but the photos were real until they weren't. When we got them developed, they showed nothing but empty woods. No house, no car, nothing. My family sold the cabin when I was 16, and I've never been back to those woods. I don't think I want to know what I'd find if I returned to that clearing. Some mysteries are better left unsolved, especially when they defy every natural law you've ever known. But I still have dreams about that house with its mysteriously repairing windows. And in those dreams, I'm always 12 years old, standing in the clearing, watching as the broken glass slowly, impossibly, knits itself back together. Story 5. I still get goosebumps thinking about what happened that night at Osman Saga. It's been 3 months, but I haven't been able to shake it off. I've barely told anyone except my closest friends because, honestly, who would believe me? But I need to get this off my chest. So, my name is Vikram. I've lived in Hyderabad my whole life, but I'd never experienced anything like this before. It was a Friday night in August when my friends Arjun, Rohit and Karan and I decided to hang out. We were bored of the usual clubs and pubs in the city, and Arjun suggested we go to Osman Sagar Lake near Gandipet for a midnight gathering. We'd been there a couple of times before during the day, but never at night. The idea sounded exciting. Just us guys, some drinks, music, and a change of scenery under the stars. We packed some beers, whiskey and snacks into Karan's car and headed out around 9 in the evening. The drive from the city to Osman Sagar took about 45 minutes. We were all in high spirits, joking around, talking about work stress and girls, the usual stuff. None of us had any clue what was waiting for us. We reached the main entrance to the lake at around 10:30. The plan was to park near the main bridge, which offers a stunning view of the water, and set up our little gathering there. But as we approached, we noticed police cars parked at the entrance of the bridge. There were a couple of officers patrolling the area with flashlights. Damn it, Arjun said. They're probably checking for drunk drivers or something. Karen, who was driving, immediately slowed down. What do we do now? I remembered there was another way to access the lake. Hey, let's go around to the other side. There's a small path that leads to the shore on the opposite end. It's more secluded anyway. Everyone agreed, and Karan made a U-turn. We drove for another 10 minutes along the perimeter road until we found the dirt path I was talking about. It was barely visible in the darkness, but Karen managed to navigate through it. We parked about 100 meters from the shore, hidden from the main road by thick bushes and neem trees. The place was eerily quiet when we got out of the car. The only sounds were crickets chirping and the occasional rustle of leaves when the wind blew. The lake stretched out before us, vast and dark, reflecting the half-moon and stars above. In the distance, across the water, we could see the faint outline of the main bridge, illuminated by a few street lamps. It must have been at least 500 meters away from where we stood. "This is perfect," Rohit said, opening the trunk to get our stuff. No cops, no people, just us and nature. We set up a small area near the shore, laying down a blanket and arranging our drinks and snacks. Arjun connected his phone to a portable speaker and played some music, keeping the volume low so as not to attract attention. The time was around 11:30, and we decided to wait until midnight to start drinking. Karan's idea of making it more special or something. As we waited, we chatted about ghost stories, which in hindsight feels like we invited what happened next. Rohit was telling us about how his grandmother's village had a haunted well where people would hear crying at night. "That's nothing," I said. "My cousin swears he saw a woman in white walking through a cemetery in Vizag." We all laughed it off. None of us really believed in ghosts or supernatural stuff. We were just passing time until midnight, trying to spook each other for fun. At exactly 12, Karen looked at his watch and announced, "All right, boys, it's time." He was about to open a beer when we heard it, a massive splash from across the lake near the bridge. We all froze. The splash was loud enough to reach us despite the distance. "What the hell was that?" Arjun whispered, turning down the music. "Probably just a big fish," Rohit suggested, but he didn't sound convinced. We all stood up and walked closer to the shore, peering across the dark water toward the bridge. At first we couldn't see anything unusual, but then, as our eyes adjusted better to the darkness, we noticed something that made my blood run cold. There was a figure on the bridge, a glowing white figure. I'm not exaggerating when I say it was glowing. It wasn't like it was wearing white clothes that reflected moonlight. It was actually emitting a pale, bluish-white light. "Are you guys seeing what I'm seeing?" I asked, my voice barely audible. They all nodded silently, eyes fixed on the apparition. The figure was moving slowly along the bridge. From that distance it was hard to make out details, but it appeared to be the shape of a person. As we watched, frozen in place, the figure did something impossible. It passed through the protective grills on the side of the bridge. Let me be clear. The bridge has metal grills about 5 feet high to prevent people from falling or jumping off. This, whatever it was, just walked through them like they weren't there. Then came a sound that will haunt me for the rest of my life, a loud, anguished cry that echoed across the lake. It sounded like a woman wailing in extreme pain or sorrow. The cry was followed by another enormous splash as the figure jumped from the bridge into the water. "What the fuck?" Karan shouted, stumbling backward. Arjun and Rohit were already backing away, their faces pale with terror. "We need to get out of here," Rohit said, grabbing his backpack, but I couldn't move. Something about that cry had paralyzed me. While my friends were scrambling to gather our things, I found myself walking toward the water, as if in a trance. I wasn't controlling my movements. It was like my body was being pulled by an invisible force. I could hear a voice, a woman's voice. But it wasn't coming from across the lake. It was inside my head, calling for help. "Help me, please. Only you can see me. Only you can help me." I was ankle deep in the water when I felt someone grab my arm forcefully. It was Arjun pulling me back. "Vikram, what the hell are you doing?" he shouted, but his voice sounded distant, muffled. I tried to break free from his grip. "She needs help," I said, still trying to walk deeper into the water. "Can't you hear her? She's calling for help." "There's nobody there," Arjun yelled, struggling to hold me back. The next thing I felt was a sharp sting across my face. Rohit had slapped me hard. The physical shock broke whatever spell I was under. Suddenly, I was aware of what I was doing, standing in the lake in the middle of the night, trying to walk toward what exactly? "We need to go, now!" Karan shouted from the car, which he had already started. As Arjun and Rohit dragged me back to the car, I looked over my shoulder one last time at the bridge. The white figure was there again, repeating the same sequence. Walking across, passing through the grills, the wailing cry, then the splash. We all scrambled into the car and Karan floored it, the tires kicking up dirt as we sped away from that cursed place. Nobody spoke for the first 10 minutes of the drive. We were all too shocked, trying to process what we had witnessed. Finally, Arjun broke the silence. "What the hell happened back there, Vikram? Why were you walking into the lake?" I tried to explain about the voice I heard, how it was asking specifically for my help, but they all looked at me like I was crazy. None of them had heard any voice, just the wailing cry before the splash. "You were in some kind of trance, man," Rohit said, still visibly shaken. "Your eyes were glazed over, and you kept mumbling about helping someone. If we hadn't stopped you, you might have—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. We all knew what could have happened. When I got home that night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that glowing figure jumping off the bridge and heard that terrible cry. But more disturbing was the voice I'd heard in my head, a voice that apparently only I could hear. The next morning I started researching Osman Sagar Lake. What I found chilled me to the bone. The lake has a dark history. It's been a notorious suicide spot for years. Dozens of people have ended their lives by jumping from that very bridge. Most of the victims were women. One case in particular stood out. A 27-year-old woman had jumped from the bridge 3 years ago after discovering her husband's affair. According to the news article, before jumping, she had called out for help, but no one was around to hear her. I believe what we witnessed that night was what paranormal researchers call a residual haunting, a traumatic event that replays itself like a recording. But that doesn't explain why the entity called out to me specifically, or why I was the only one who could hear her pleas for help. I've been back to the lake twice since then, during daylight hours and with more people, but nothing unusual has happened. Part of me wants to go back at midnight to see if the phenomenon repeats. But a stronger part of me is terrified of what might happen if I do. What if I can't break free from the trance next time? What if no one is there to pull me back? My friends and I don't talk about that night anymore. When we hang out, we stick to crowded places in the city. None of us has suggested another trip to any lake, let alone Osman Sagar. I still don't understand why it happened or why I was affected so strongly. Sometimes I wonder if I have some connection to the woman who died there. Maybe I resemble someone she knew in life, or maybe there's something about my energy that she was drawn to. All I know is that something is still there at Osman Sagar, trapped in an endless cycle of despair, and for some reason, it believes I can help it find peace. I don't know if I can, or even if I should try, but I can't shake the feeling that someday I'll find myself back at that lake at midnight, facing whatever waits for me there. Story 6. I still can't really explain what happened to me last month in Eastern Oregon. I've tried to rationalize it, but I can't shake the feeling that whatever was out there in those woods wasn't normal. I need to get this off my chest, so here goes. I'd been stressed for months, work piling up, relationship falling apart, the usual life stuff that eventually crushes you. I needed to get away, somewhere with no people, no cell service, just me and nature. I've always been an outdoorsy person, so a solo camping trip seemed perfect. After researching for weeks, I found this spot in Eastern Oregon, way off the beaten path. An old clearing alongside a forgotten logging road that hadn't been used in years. The drive out there took nearly 6 hours from Portland. The last 2 hours were on progressively smaller roads until I was bouncing along this overgrown dirt track that barely qualified as a road. Perfect. That's exactly what I wanted. Somewhere nobody would accidentally stumble across me. I parked at what seemed to be the end of the road and hiked about a mile further in. The clearing I found was beautiful, a small grassy area next to a gentle creek bordered by dense forest on 3 sides. I set up my tent near the tree line, got a small fire going, and just sat there listening to the birds, the insects, the water. For the first time in months, I felt my shoulders relax. That first night was peaceful. I fell asleep to the gentle sounds of the forest, crickets chirping, the occasional owl, the soft rustling of leaves in the breeze. I slept better than I had in months. The next day, I hiked around exploring, took some photos, read my book by the creek. As the sun started to set, I made dinner on my portable stove and watched the stars come out. There were so many of them, with no light pollution. It was exactly what I needed. I must have fallen asleep around 10 that second night. I'm not sure what time it was when I woke up, but it was still pitch black outside. At first, I wasn't sure what had disturbed me. Then it hit me. The silence. Complete, absolute silence. No crickets, no rustling leaves, no distant animal calls, nothing. It was like someone had hit the mute button on the entire forest. I lay there, suddenly wide awake, my heart starting to pound. In the outdoors, sudden silence usually means one thing. A predator, maybe a bear or a cougar, had wandered nearby, and all the smaller creatures were hiding. I reached for my headlamp and knife, keeping both close. That's when I heard it, a soft rustling outside my tent, maybe 20 feet away, like someone or something moving very carefully through the underbrush. I froze, barely breathing. The rustling stopped, then started again, closer this time. Then came the footsteps, slow, deliberate, and unmistakably human. They weren't the sound of an animal moving through the forest. These were footsteps, someone walking upright, stepping carefully but not trying to be completely silent either, almost like they wanted me to hear them. I clutched my knife tighter, my palm sweating against the handle. The footsteps circled my tent slowly, pausing occasionally. I could hear breathing now, deep, steady breathing. Whoever it was stopped right outside the thin fabric of my tent, so close I could have reached out and touched them through the nylon. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. My entire body was rigid with fear. Part of me wanted to call out, to ask who was there, but some primal instinct kept me silent. After what felt like an eternity, the footsteps moved away, fading into the distance until I couldn't hear them anymore. I didn't sleep another minute that night. I lay there clutching my knife, straining to hear any sound at all in the unnatural silence. As the first gray light of dawn filtered through my tent, the forest sounds gradually returned. First a few birds, then more, until the normal morning chorus was in full swing. He unzipped my tent cautiously and peered out. Everything looked normal, too normal almost, like nothing had happened. I stepped outside, scanning the area around my campsite. That's when I saw them, footprints in the soft soil near the creek. Barefoot human footprints leading directly toward my tent, then turning and heading back into the woods. My stomach dropped. It hadn't been my imagination. Someone had been there, watching me as I slept. I followed the tracks with my eyes to where they disappeared into the tree line. They came from the north, the deeper part of the forest I hadn't explored yet. I tried to rationalize it, maybe another camper, but why would they be barefoot? Why circle my tent in the middle of the night without saying anything? And I hadn't seen any sign of another campsite during my hike the previous day. I decided I wasn't sticking around to find out. I quickly packed up my gear, my hands shaking slightly as I broke down the tent. I kept looking over my shoulder, scanning the tree line for any movement. The forest felt different now, watchful somehow, like there were eyes on me from every direction. By 8 in the morning, I had everything packed and ready to go. My car was about an hour's hike away, following the small stream back to the logging road. I hoisted my pack and started walking, moving quickly but trying not to look like I was panicking. After about 20 minutes, I stopped in a small clearing to adjust my pack straps and take a drink of water. That's when I saw it, or rather him, a figure crouched behind a tree about 50 yards away, partially hidden but clearly watching me. He was shirtless, his skin unusually pale against the dark forest backdrop. He didn't move or make a sound, just stared. My blood went cold. I pretended I hadn't seen him, calmly put my water bottle away, and continued walking, fighting the urge to run. Every few minutes I would casually glance behind me, and each time I'd catch a glimpse of movement, the figure slipping between trees, always maintaining that same distance. I was being stalked. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I picked up my pace, no longer caring if he knew I'd spotted him. The trail I'd been following suddenly seemed unfamiliar. Had I taken a wrong turn? The stream was still there, but the path looked different in this direction. I should have reached the logging road by now. Panic started to set in. I pulled out my map, trying to orient myself, but my hands were shaking too badly to hold it steady. I looked back again. The figure was closer now, maybe 30 yards away, still moving from tree to tree, still watching. I abandoned the trail entirely and cut through the undergrowth, pushing through bushes and scrambling over fallen logs. Branches whipped at my face and arms, leaving scratches, but I didn't care. I just needed to get back to my car, back to civilization. Every few minutes, I'd catch another glimpse of him, moving silently through the forest, parallel to me, never losing sight of me despite my erratic path. He never tried to approach, never made a sound, just kept watching, following. The sun was starting to set when I finally stumbled onto the logging road. I nearly cried with relief when I saw my car sitting there, exactly where I'd left it. I ran the last 100 yards, fumbling with my keys as I approached. That's when I noticed something wrong with my car. There were handprints on the back window, smudged, dusty fingerprints dragged across the glass. Someone had been there, touching my car, waiting for me. I threw my pack in the back seat and jumped behind the wheel, locking the doors immediately. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. As the engine roared to life, I looked in my rearview mirror. There he was, standing in the middle of the road behind my car. In the fading light, I could see him clearly for the first time. Tall, unnaturally thin, with long limbs and that same pale skin. But what struck me most were his eyes, dark, unblinking, fixed on me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. I floored it, the tires spinning on the dirt road before catching grip. I didn't slow down for the next 20 miles, bouncing violently over potholes and ruts, constantly checking my mirrors. There was no sign of pursuit, but that didn't calm me down one bit. I drove until I finally got cell service, then pulled over and called the police. They met me at the trailhead, but by then it was fully dark. I must have looked insane, scratched up, clothes torn, dehydrated and babbling about being stalked by someone in the woods. They took my statement and promised to send someone to check out the area in the morning. I never heard back from them. When I called to follow up, they said they'd found no evidence of anyone else being in that area. No campsites, no footprints, nothing. They suggested I might have seen another hiker who was just as startled to see me in such a remote location. But I know what I saw. I know someone, or something, watched me, followed me, circled my tent in the dead of night. I know those footprints were real, and sometimes when I'm driving alone at night, I check my rearview mirror and half expect to see that pale figure standing in the road behind me, watching with those dark, unblinking eyes. I haven't been camping since. I don't think I ever will again. Story 7. I've always been an avid hiker, been doing solo trips since I was in my early 20s, and at 32 I considered myself pretty experienced in backcountry camping. I'd done the Appalachian, parts of the PCT, and countless weekend trips all over the country. I know my gear, I know basic survival, and I'm always prepared, or at least I thought I was. This happened last spring, around early April. I'd planned a 4-day trip in the Rockies, in a more remote section of Colorado where I hadn't hiked before. The weather forecast looked good. Cold nights but sunny days, perfect for hiking without summer crowds or bugs. I'd meticulously mapped my route, packed my ultralight gear, and left my itinerary with my sister as always, standard procedure. I remember being excited that morning as I parked at the trailhead. There were only two other cars there, a good sign that I'd have plenty of solitude. The first day's hike was about 11 miles to my planned camping spot, a small clearing near a stream that I'd read about on a hiking forum. The hike in was gorgeous. Spring was just starting to touch the mountains, some early wildflowers poking through in sunny spots, patches of snow still lingering in the shadows. I saw a few deer, lots of squirrels, even spotted a hawk circling overhead. I remember thinking how alive everything felt. I reached my camping spot around 4 in the afternoon. It was perfect. A small flat area about 50 yards from a clear stream, surrounded by mature pines with enough space between them for my hammock setup. I always use a hammock when I can, more comfortable than sleeping on the ground, and honestly, I just sleep better elevated. I went through my usual routine, set up my hammock with a rain fly even though the forecast was clear, always better safe than sorry, hung my bear bag about 100 yards from camp, collected some water from the stream to filter, and cooked a simple freeze-dried meal. I even had a small flask of whiskey to enjoy while watching the sunset from a nearby rock outcropping. Everything was textbook perfect. The sunset was spectacular, layers of orange and pink stretching across the mountain peaks. I remember feeling that deep satisfaction that only comes when you're alone in nature, miles from anybody else, completely self-sufficient. By the time it got dark, I was ready to turn in. I did one final check of my camp, made sure my bear bag was secure, brushed my teeth away from my sleeping area, and climbed into my hammock. I had my headlamp, knife, and bear spray all within arm's reach, just my standard setup. I drifted off to sleep quickly, tired from the day's hike. Here's where things get weird. I'm usually a light sleeper outdoors. I'll wake up to the sound of animals moving around, branches cracking, anything out of the ordinary. But that night, I slept deeply, too deeply. When I think back now, I realize the forest was completely silent. No owls hooting, no rustling in the underbrush, no wind in the trees. Nothing. It was like the entire forest was holding its breath. I woke up at first light, that grayish pre-dawn when you can see shapes but not colors. I felt rested but strange, like something was off. I lay there for a few minutes, listening, still unnaturally quiet. No morning birds, no squirrels, nothing. I unzipped my sleeping bag and climbed out of my hammock. The air was crisp, probably in the high 30s. I put on my boots, which I'd left underneath my hammock as usual, and grabbed my toiletry bag to go brush my teeth by the stream. That's when I saw the first print. It was maybe 15 feet from my hammock, a perfect, clear mountain lion track in a small patch of damp soil. My heart immediately started pounding. I've seen cat tracks before, but this was unmistakable. Large, round, no claw marks visible like you'd see with a canine. A big cat, a very big cat. I froze, scanning the surrounding area, and that's when I realized it wasn't just one print. There were more. As my eyes adjusted and I really started looking, I could see them. Not everywhere, just in patches of softer ground or morning dew-dampened areas, and they formed a pattern. The mountain lion had circled my hammock, repeatedly. I could see where it had paced, creating a rough circle about 10 to 15 feet from where I slept. In some places, the tracks disappeared where the ground was harder or covered with pine needles, but they'd pick up again a few feet later, continuing the circle. My blood went cold. I've encountered plenty of wildlife before. Had black bears investigate my camp, coyotes howl nearby, even saw a mountain lion at a distance once in California, but this was different. This predator had been inches from me while I slept, completely unaware. And the silence. That unnatural silence suddenly made sense. Every creature in those woods knew a top predator was hunting. Except it hadn't been hunting, had it? It had been watching, circling, considering. I tried to find tracks leading to or from my camp area, wanting to know which direction it had come from and gone, but there was nothing clear. Just that circle around my hammock. The beast must have approached across the rocky ground where it wouldn't leave prints. Smart, deliberate. I'm not ashamed to say I was scared. Really scared. I stood there in the morning light, my breath making little clouds in the cold air, trying to decide what to do. My original plan had been to go deeper into the wilderness over the next 3 days. That suddenly seemed like a terrible idea. I forced myself to go through the motions of morning routine, brushed my teeth, filtered water, made coffee, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The forest remained eerily quiet, no birds, no squirrels. Nothing had returned yet. As I sipped my coffee, I kept scanning the tree line, the rocks, anywhere a large cat could be hiding. Mountain lions are ambush predators. They don't typically stalk humans, but they're opportunistic, and one had spent God knows how long during the night watching me sleep, deciding whether I was prey. I checked my gear carefully. Nothing was damaged or missing. My bear bag was untouched. There were no scratches on my backpack or anything else. The cat hadn't been interested in my food or supplies. It had been interested in me. I made the decision pretty quickly to abandon my planned route. I'd hike out the same way I came in, back to my car, 11 miles. I could do that by early afternoon if I pushed. Breaking camp was the hardest part. I kept stopping to scan my surroundings, kept hearing phantom sounds in the still, silent forest. My hands were shaking as I packed up my hammock. I found myself talking out loud, something I never do when I'm alone in the woods. Just nonsense, really. Okay, just roll this up, clip that there, you're fine, everything's fine. Anything to break that silence. I skipped breakfast, just shoved a protein bar in my pocket to eat while walking. I wanted out of there. I left nothing behind, packed everything meticulously as always, but did it in record time. The hike out was intense. I've never been so aware of my surroundings. Every shadow, every movement in my peripheral vision made my heart rate spike. I held my trekking poles more like weapons than walking aids. I kept my bear spray in my pocket instead of my backpack. I didn't stop to take pictures or enjoy the scenery. I just walked as quickly as I safely could. The weirdest thing was how the forest stayed quiet for the first couple of miles. Usually when you're hiking, you'll disturb wildlife. Birds will fly off, small animals will scurry away, but it was like nothing had returned yet. Like the predator's presence was still being felt. Around mile 3, I finally heard a bird call, then another. By mile 5, the forest sounded normal again. I nearly cried with relief when I saw a squirrel dart across the path. I made it back to the trailhead by 1 in the afternoon. My car was still there, untouched. The other 2 vehicles were gone. I threw my pack in the trunk, got in, locked the doors, and just sat there for a while, hands shaking on the steering wheel. It's been almost a year now. I've gone camping since then. Lots of times, actually, but never alone. Not in the Rockies. I can't. I've tried to rationalize what happened. Maybe the mountain lion was just curious. Maybe it was a female making sure I wasn't a threat to her cubs. Maybe it was old or injured and considering if I was easy enough prey to risk an attack. But I can't stop thinking about how silently it moved. How I slept through a 150-pound predator circling me for who knows how long. How it could have decided differently, and I would have never woken up. Sometimes I think about those tracks, that perfect circle around where I slept. I think about the decision that animal made, to watch rather than attack. And I wonder if I'll ever feel truly safe in the wilderness again, knowing how close death can come while you sleep, how silently it can consider you, and how arbitrary its decisions might be. The mountains are still beautiful. The wilderness still calls to me. But now I know what it feels like to be reminded that out there, we're not at the top of the food chain. We're just another animal, vulnerable while we sleep, circled by predators making calculations we'll never understand. Story 8. I've been a dispatcher at our county's 911 center for about 6 years now. It's a small operation in a rural area, just a handful of us covering the entire county. I typically work the overnight shift with 2 other dispatchers, Jen and Mike. The building itself is pretty old, probably from the 70s, and sits on the outskirts of town, surrounded by woods on one side and an empty lot on the other. Nothing about our center ever seemed unusual until about 4 months ago. I guess I should mention that the overnight shift is usually pretty quiet. We'll get the occasional drunk driver call or domestic dispute, but between 2 and 5 in the morning, it's usually dead silent. It was a Tuesday night. Well, Wednesday morning technically, around 3 a.m. I was at my console finishing up some paperwork when I heard Jen gasp. When I looked over, her face had gone completely white. "Did you see that?" she whispered, pointing to the windows that look out into the hallway. "See what?" I asked. "Someone just walked past the window," she said. Mike rolled his chair over. "I saw it too. A shadow or something." I rolled my eyes. The overnight shift makes people jumpy, and these two were always trying to freak each other out. Very funny guys. "Charlotte, I'm serious," Jen insisted. "There was someone in the hallway. Protocol is that we always have to check out any potential security concerns, so I grabbed the flashlight we keep by the door and stepped out into the hallway. It was empty and quiet, just like I expected. The security door at the end of the hall was locked, the keypad light glowing green like normal. "There's nobody out here," I called back, flicking the lights on and off to prove my point. "You guys are seeing things." When I came back in, they both looked genuinely puzzled, but I didn't think much of it until about 20 minutes later, when I suddenly felt weird. It's hard to describe, but it was like a sudden wave of nausea mixed with dread. The hair on my arms stood up, and I got this overwhelming feeling that I was being watched. I glanced over toward the break room area, and that's when I saw him. Just for a split second, a rough-looking man with a beard crouched down and peeking around the side of the desk closest to the kitchen. I jerked my head to look directly at him, but there was nothing there. "You okay?" Mike asked, noticing me staring. "I just thought I saw something," I mumbled, feeling stupid. The rest of the shift passed without incident, but I couldn't shake that weird feeling. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I was just tired, or maybe Jen and Mike had gotten in my head with their hallway ghost story. The next night was when things started getting genuinely strange. We all arrived for our shift at 11 p.m. like usual. Everything seemed normal at first, but around 2 a.m. I noticed the supply closet door was wide open. I distinctly remembered closing it earlier when I got some paper for the printer. "Did either of you go into the closet?" I asked. Both Jen and Mike shook their heads. We all looked at each other, and I could tell they were thinking the same thing I was. I got up to close it, trying to convince myself I must have forgotten, even though I was certain I hadn't. That's when I saw him again. This time, it wasn't just a glimpse. He was standing by the kitchen door, a man with brownish hair and facial hair wearing what looked like a green jacket. His face was bloody, and he was just staring at me. I froze, unable to move or speak. He didn't move either, just kept staring with this hollow expression. When I blinked, he was gone. I must have made some kind of noise because Jen asked if I was okay. Before I could answer, our headsets suddenly came alive with static and then heavy breathing. It lasted about 10 seconds, just this grunting, wheezing sound. Then it stopped. "What the hell was that?" Mike said, checking the system. "That came through on an admin channel. Nobody should be on that frequency." We spent the next hour checking all our equipment, making sure nothing was malfunctioning. Everything checked out fine. We even called our tech support guy at home, who said there was no way anyone could accidentally broadcast on that channel without access to our secured system. By the time our shift ended at 7 a.m., we were all on edge. I didn't mention what I'd seen by the kitchen, though. I was still trying to convince myself it was just my imagination. The next few nights got progressively worse. The lights in the break room would turn on by themselves. Doors we knew were closed would be open when we turned around. We'd hear slamming sounds from empty parts of the building. Sometimes the whole place would fill with this awful smell, like sewage or something rotting. One night around 4 a.m., we all distinctly heard laughter coming from the basement. Our building doesn't have a basement. The radio transmissions continued too, random bursts of static, breathing, and twice we heard what sounded like a man's voice asking, "Are you there?" and once saying, "Please come back." Each time, the system showed no record of the transmission. But the worst part was that sick feeling in my stomach that would come over me suddenly, always right before something happened, and the figure walking past the windows. We all started seeing it. sometimes just a shadow, sometimes clearly a man. After about 2 weeks of this, Jen brought in an old newspaper clipping she'd found at the library. It was from 35 years ago, a story about a man who'd been murdered just a few blocks from where our building now stands. The guy had been stabbed multiple times and his body wasn't found for days. The article included a grainy black and white photo of the victim. When she showed it to me, I felt like someone had dumped ice water down my back. It was him, the man I'd seen by the kitchen door. Same face, same beard. The only difference was the green jacket. In the photo, he was wearing a suit. "That's him," I whispered. "That's exactly who I saw." Jen nodded grimly. Mike saw him too. "We didn't want to freak you out." After that, things escalated. We'd hear footsteps in the hallway when no one was there. The attic access in the ceiling would rattle like someone was trying to open it from above. The sinks in the bathroom would turn on by themselves. Toilets would flush. Once, all three of us heard what sounded like a woman moaning and then screaming in pain from the break room. When we rushed in, it was empty, but freezing cold. We started hearing loud bangs, like fireworks or gunshots, that would make us jump out of our seats. Our security cameras would mysteriously stop working in the areas where we heard noises. The IT guy couldn't explain it. They'd just go offline for a few minutes, then come back on like nothing happened. What makes all this even more terrifying is that we knew it couldn't be one of us playing pranks. Our protocol requires that one person always remain in the center while another uses the facilities or takes a break. There's literally no way for us to be in two places at once, and we've verified multiple times that it's impossible for one of us to be causing these disturbances. Last month, the day shift supervisor, Karen, pulled me aside. She looked exhausted and nervous. "Have you been seeing things on your shift?" she asked quietly. I hesitated, not wanting to sound crazy, but finally nodded. "A man with a beard and a green jacket." My blood ran cold. "You've seen him too?" "Not me," she said. "Donna on my shift and Ray from swing shift mentioned something similar. They all described the same guy." That's when I realized this wasn't just happening to us on the night shift. Other dispatchers were experiencing it too, independently, on completely different shifts, and they were all seeing the same man. Last week was the worst night yet. It was around 3:30 a.m. and we were all at our stations. That sick feeling hit me suddenly, stronger than ever before. I looked up just as all the lights in the center flickered. The radio erupted with static so loud we all yanked our headsets off, and then I saw him, standing right in the middle of our dispatch center. Not just a glimpse this time, he was fully there, staring directly at me. His face was covered in blood, his green jacket torn open to reveal multiple stab wounds in his chest. His mouth moved like he was trying to say something, but no sound came out. Mike saw him too. He later told me the man had turned to look at him and mouthed what looked like "help me" before vanishing. The worst part, we checked the security footage afterward. The cameras showed all three of us suddenly jumping and staring at the same spot in the room, a completely empty spot on the recording. There was nothing there on the video, but we all saw him. We've tried everything. The building manager brought in an electrician to check for wiring issues that might explain the lights and equipment problems. They found nothing. We've had the HVAC system inspected for gas leaks that could cause hallucinations, all clear. The county even hired a security consultant who installed additional cameras and motion sensors. They never detect anything when these events happen. I don't know what to do anymore. I've considered quitting, but this job is my livelihood, and frankly, I feel a weird responsibility now. If something is happening here, if someone is trying to communicate, I want to understand why. Last night I was alone in the dispatch center for just a few minutes while Jen and Mike were both checking the perimeter after we heard a loud crash outside. That sick feeling washed over me again, and I knew he was there before I even looked up. He was standing right in front of my console, close enough that I could have reached out and touched him. His eyes were hollow, empty, but somehow desperate. The blood on his face looked wet, fresh. He raised his hand slowly and pointed at me, then at the radio. That's when my console lit up with an incoming call, but the call screen showed nothing. No number, no location data, just static, and through the static, barely audible, a voice whispered, "They're still here." The line went dead. The man vanished, and seconds later, Jen and Mike came back in, saying they hadn't found anything outside. I haven't told them about what happened yet. I'm not sure what to do, but I know one thing for certain. Whatever or whoever is in our 911 center isn't going away, and I think he's trying to tell us something important. Story 9. I never thought I'd be sharing this, but I can't get it out of my head even months later. I'm a college student at Pine Grove University, and like most broke students, I pick up side gigs when I can. This past winter break, I started doing DoorDash deliveries around town to make some extra cash. Pine Grove is normally a pretty quiet place, one of those towns where everyone knows everyone, or at least that's what I thought until that night. It was a Thursday night in December, around 9 p.m. The temperature had dropped below freezing, and there was this eerie fog that had settled over the town. I'd been doing deliveries since about 5, and I was thinking about calling it a night when one last order came through. It was a big one, like $60 worth of food from this local burger place. The tip looked decent, so I figured, why not? One more delivery and I'd head home. I picked up the food and plugged the address into my GPS. As I drove, I realized I was heading towards a part of town I'd never been to before, which was weird because I'd lived in Pine Grove my whole life. The GPS took me down these winding back roads, farther and farther away from the main part of town. The streetlights became fewer and farther between, and the houses more spread out. After about 15 minutes of driving, I ended up on this narrow road that seemed to lead nowhere. My headlights were the only source of light out there, and the fog made visibility absolute shit. The GPS announced that I had arrived, but all I could see was dense forest on both sides of the road. I slowed down, thinking I'd missed a turn or something, when my headlights caught a wooden gate up ahead. I pulled up to it and checked the address on my phone against the numbers nailed to the gate. They matched. The gate wasn't locked or anything, just closed. I got out of my car, feeling the cold air hit my face immediately. It was dead silent out there. No cars, no people, nothing but the sound of the wind rustling through the trees. I pushed the gate open, wincing at the loud creak it made, and got back in my car. There was a narrow gravel path beyond the gate that disappeared into the trees. I hesitated for a second, but then thought about the customer waiting for their food and the tip I stood to lose. So I drove through, following this path that seemed to go on forever, branches occasionally scraping against my car windows. Finally, the trees cleared, and I saw it, this old wooden house sitting in a small clearing. It looked like it had been there for decades, way older than the other houses I'd passed on the way. The weird thing was, there wasn't a single light on. The whole place was completely dark. I double-checked the address again, definitely the right place. I parked my car and grabbed the food bags. As I approached the house, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The front door was wide open, not just unlocked, but standing open about halfway, revealing nothing but darkness inside. There were no cars in the driveway, no lights, no sounds coming from inside. Just this open door like it was waiting for me. I stood there for a moment, wondering if I should call the customer. But then I thought maybe they just forgot to turn on the porch light and left the door open because they were expecting the delivery. I walked up the porch steps, the old wood creaking under my feet. "Hello?" I called out, standing at the threshold. No answer. I set the food bags down on the porch and was about to take a picture as proof of delivery when I heard it. A man's voice coming from somewhere upstairs inside the house. "Bring it on up here, will ya?" The voice was deep, almost gravelly. I froze. I couldn't see anyone, just the dark hallway leading into the house and a staircase right near the entrance that disappeared into complete darkness. I can just leave it here if that's easier," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Nah, bring it up. I'm not feeling too good tonight," the voice called back. I hesitated, one foot on the porch, one on the first step inside. Something felt very wrong. Why was the house completely dark? Why would someone order all this food if they were sick? Why not just come downstairs when they heard me arrive? Against my better judgment, I took another step inside. The floorboards creaked loudly under my weight. It was freezing inside, maybe even colder than outside. I could see my breath forming little clouds in front of my face. "Attaboy, I'll grab it from you, right up here." The voice came from the top of the stairs, but I still couldn't see anyone, just darkness. And there was something about the way he said "attaboy" that sent chills down my spine. It didn't sound like someone talking to their delivery driver. It sounded predatory. In that moment, something in my brain just screamed danger. Every instinct in my body told me to get the hell out of there. I backed away, nearly tripping over the threshold. "Sorry, I can't come inside. Company policy," I lied, my voice shaking. "I'll leave it right here on the porch." There was silence for a beat, and then, "That's not how this works, Marcus." My blood ran cold. I hadn't told him my name. DoorDash only shows my first initial, not my full name. I dropped the bags right there on the porch and ran. I didn't look back, didn't stop to take a picture, didn't do anything but sprint to my car as fast as I could. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. As I was starting the car, I swear I caught a glimpse of a figure standing in the doorway, but I didn't stick around to confirm. I sped down that gravel path, branches scraping my car, not caring about the damage. When I reached the gate, I didn't even bother to close it behind me. I just hit the gas and didn't slow down until I was back on the main road, my heart pounding in my chest. When I got home, I was still shaking. I locked all my doors and windows and couldn't sleep at all that night. I kept replaying everything in my head. The dark house, the open door, the voice calling me by name. I kept thinking about what might have happened if I'd gone up those stairs. The next morning, I reported the incident to DoorDash support, but they weren't much help. They just said they'd make a note of it and told me I could reject any deliveries I didn't feel comfortable with in the future. No shit. But I couldn't let it go. I kept thinking about that house, that voice. How did he know my name? What was waiting for me at the top of those stairs? A few days later, I got curious, or maybe stupid, and decided to do some research on the address. I went to the county property records website and looked it up. What I found made my skin crawl. The house had been abandoned for over 5 years. It was owned by the state now, seized in some kind of criminal investigation. There was no electricity connected to the property. No one should have been living there. No one should have been able to place a food order from that address. I dug deeper, searching news archives for anything about that house, and I found something. An old article from about 6 years ago. A man had been arrested there for a series of abductions. He'd lure people to the house under false pretenses and then... Well, the article didn't go into details, but it mentioned that human remains had been found on the property. The man had died in prison 4 years ago. I still don't know who or what was in that house that night. I don't know how they knew my name or what they wanted from me. All I know is that I came very close to walking up those dark stairs, and I'm certain I wouldn't have come back down. I quit DoorDash the next day. No amount of money is worth what could have happened to me. I still drive the long way around to avoid that part of town, and I've never told anyone exactly where that house is. I don't want anyone else getting curious and going out there. Sometimes at night I still hear that voice in my dreams. Attaboy. And I wake up in a cold sweat, wondering what was waiting for me at the top of those stairs in that dark, abandoned house. I've tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was just some squatter who happened to know my name somehow. Maybe the property records were outdated. Maybe it was all just a sick prank. But deep down, I know better. Something was very wrong in that house, and whatever it was, it knew me. It was waiting for me. And sometimes, on nights when I can't sleep, I can't shake the feeling that it's still waiting. I check my doors and windows twice every night now. I never make deliveries after dark, and I never ever go anywhere near that part of town again. That delivery changed me. I used to think I knew every corner of Pine Grove, but now I realize there are places in this town, maybe in every town, that exist in some kind of shadow. Places where the normal rules don't apply. Places where something waits in the darkness. And if you ever find yourself on a delivery or just driving around and end up at a dark house with an open door, don't go inside. No matter what voices you hear calling to you, just drop whatever you're carrying and run. Run, and don't look back. Because some customers aren't looking for food delivery, they're looking for something else entirely. And I was almost it. Enter story 10. I still can't sleep some nights thinking about what happened last Halloween. I've never been the type to believe in the supernatural or anything like that. I'm pretty grounded, always been the skeptical one in my friend group. But after what went down at that warehouse in Oakland, I just don't know anymore. I've lived in Oakland for about 4 years now. It's a cool city with its rough edges, but I've always felt comfortable here. There's this abandoned warehouse near Jack London Square that locals always talk about. You know how every town has that one haunted spot that teenagers dare each other to visit? This was ours. The building itself isn't much to look at, just a big concrete structure from maybe the 50s or 60s, all boarded up with faded, no trespassing signs. It used to be some kind of manufacturing plant before closing down in the 90s. The rumors about it being haunted started maybe 15 years ago when a security guard supposedly had a heart attack inside. After that, weird stories began circulating, people hearing voices, seeing shadows moving behind the dirty windows, stuff like that. I'd walked past it dozens of times and never gave it much thought until last Halloween. My friend Amber and I had been at this costume party in downtown Oakland, but it was kind of lame, so we decided to bail around 11:30. We were both a little buzzed, but nowhere near drunk. I was dressed as some half-assed version of a zombie, and she was a witch, typical Halloween stuff. It was Amber's idea to walk past the warehouse on our way to catch an Uber. "It's Halloween, we should do something spooky," she said. I remember laughing it off but going along with it. The night was clear and cool, and we were in no hurry. When we got to the warehouse, it looked the same as always, dark, abandoned, slightly ominous in the moonlight. We were just standing across the street, joking about how we should try to peek inside, when I noticed two guys walking toward the main entrance. They weren't dressed in costumes, just regular clothes, jeans and dark jackets. Something about them immediately struck me as odd. They walked with this strange purpose, like they knew exactly where they were going. "Check those guys out," I whispered to Amber. We watched as they approached the main entrance, a big metal door that everyone knows is always locked. I'd never seen anyone go in or out of that building in all my time in Oakland. Without hesitation, one of the men pulled the door open. No key, no struggle, nothing. It opened like it wasn't locked at all. They both walked in, and the door closed behind them. "Did you see that?" Amber grabbed my arm. "How did they get in so easily?" That's when curiosity got the better of us. We crossed the street and approached the door. In hindsight, I wish we'd just kept walking. The door was a heavy industrial type with a rusted handle. I grabbed it and pulled, expecting it to open the same way it had for those men. It didn't budge. I tried again, harder this time, but it was definitely locked. "Maybe there's another entrance they used," Amber suggested, but we both knew they had come through this door. We were standing there, confused, when the door suddenly opened from inside. The same two men walked out, looking completely normal. Up close, I could see they were probably in their 30s. Nothing remarkable about them except for this weird calmness they both had. "Looking for a way in?" one of them asked. He had dark hair and this intense stare that made me uncomfortable. "We just saw you guys go in," I said. "We were curious." "It's pretty spooky in there," the other one said with a slight smile. He was taller with lighter hair. Lots of empty rooms and old machinery. Something felt off about the whole interaction. These guys didn't seem drunk or high, just different somehow. Like they were trying too hard to act normal. "How did you get in?" Amber asked. "We just tried the door and it was locked." "It's not locked," the dark-haired one said. "Here, let me show you." He reached for the handle and pulled. Nothing happened. The door stayed shut. He frowned and tried again. Still locked. "That's weird," he said, but he didn't sound surprised. It was open a minute ago. The four of us stood there in this awkward silence. I was getting increasingly uncomfortable. I glanced at Amber and I could tell she was feeling it too. Well, maybe it locks automatically, I suggested, ready to leave. We should probably get going anyway. That's when it happened. As we were about to walk away, the taller guy looked directly at me and said, "At least my dad didn't die when I was 3. I froze. My blood went cold. My father had died in a car accident when I was 3 years old. It's not something I talk about often, and I definitely hadn't mentioned it that night. I'd only known Amber for about 6 months, and I wasn't even sure if I'd ever told her about my dad. The guy who said it looked momentarily confused by his own words, like they had surprised him too. Then his expression changed to something I still can't quite describe, almost like recognition mixed with fear. "What did you just say?" I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. He blinked a few times, then shook his head. "I don't know why I said that," he replied quietly. Then he looked at his friend, and some unspoken communication passed between them. "We should go," the dark-haired one said. They both started walking away, not hurrying but not dawdling either. Amber grabbed my arm. That was super weird. What was he talking about? I couldn't answer right away. I was trying to process what had just happened. How could this stranger know such a personal detail about my life? I hadn't posted about it on social media. I wasn't wearing anything that could have given it away. There was simply no way he could have known. "My dad did die when I was 3, I finally told her. "But I never mentioned that to you, did I?" The look on her face confirmed it. "No, you never did." "How did he know that?" We both turned to look at the two men, but they were already at the end of the street, turning the corner. Something made me not want to follow them. That's when I noticed something else. While we'd been standing there, the temperature had dropped considerably. I could see my breath in the air even though it hadn't been that cold earlier, and there was this feeling like we were being watched. Not by the two men, but by something else, something from inside the warehouse. I looked up at the building and noticed a light flickering in one of the upper windows, just for a second, and then it was gone, but I'm certain I saw it. "Let's get out of here," I said to Amber. She didn't argue. As we hurried away, I couldn't shake this overwhelming feeling of dread. It wasn't just about what the guy had said about my dad. It was this sense that we had just brushed up against something we weren't supposed to know about, something that existed just outside our normal perception. We didn't talk much on the Uber ride home. What was there to say? How do you process something like that? When we got to Amber's place, she asked if I wanted to come in, but I declined. I needed to be alone to think. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the encounter in my head. Those two men didn't seem threatening, but they didn't seem entirely human either. The way they moved, the way they spoke, the casual way that one of them dropped a deeply personal fact about my life, it all felt wrong. I spent the next day researching the warehouse online, looking for any information that might explain what happened. I found the usual urban legends and ghost stories, but nothing substantial. I even tried to find out if anyone had died there besides the security guard, wondering if maybe my father had some connection to the place that I didn't know about. Nothing. A week later, I worked up the courage to go back during daylight. The warehouse looked different in the sun, less menacing, more sad and dilapidated. The door was still locked, and there was a heavy chain around the handles that looked like it had been there for years. I walked around the entire perimeter and couldn't find any other way in that didn't involve breaking in. I never saw those two men again. I've thought about them almost every day since. Who were they? How did they get into a building that seems permanently locked? And most importantly, how did one of them know about my father? The rational part of my brain has come up with all sorts of explanations. Maybe they were just messing with me. Maybe it was a lucky guess. Maybe I'd mentioned my dad to Amber and forgotten about it, and somehow these guys overheard us talking earlier that night. But deep down, I know none of those explanations make sense. Whatever happened that night was something I can't explain, something beyond normal understanding. It's been almost a year now, and I still get chills thinking about it. I've never gone back to that warehouse at night, and I never will. There are some doors that aren't meant to be opened, some boundaries that shouldn't be crossed. I feel like we got a glimpse of something that night, something that exists in the shadows of our world, watching and waiting. And sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I wonder if they're still watching me. Story 11. I'm writing this because I need to get it out. I've held it in for so long, trying to make sense of everything that happened to my family. Maybe putting it down will help me process it all. I don't know. But what I do know is that something was with us during those dark months in 2009, something I can't explain. It started when my dad, Ronald, was diagnosed with pancreatic liver cancer in 2007. The doctors gave him maybe a year. He was the rock of our family, always smiling, always making jokes, even when things were tough. When they told him, he just nodded, like he was accepting a weather report or something. But I saw his hands shaking when he thought no one was looking. Then, barely 2 months later, my sister Shira found a lump in her neck, Hodgkin's lymphoma. She was only 17. I remember standing in the hallway outside her hospital room, watching my mom collapse against the wall, sliding down until she was sitting on the floor, just staring at nothing. Dad was with Shira, holding her hand, making her laugh somehow. I heard him promise her, "I'm not going anywhere while you're sick, kiddo. We'll fight this together." And for a while it seemed like they might both make it. Shira responded well to her treatments. Her hair fell out and she got so skinny you could see every bone, but she kept fighting. Dad, though, the cancer was eating him alive from the inside. He tried to hide how much pain he was in, but we all knew. He'd lock himself in the bathroom and run the shower so we wouldn't hear him crying. By early 2009, Shira went into remission. We celebrated with a small party at home. Dad could barely get out of bed by then, but he made it to the living room. I took a picture of him and Shira together that day, both of them so thin but smiling. 2 survivors, we thought. On March 27, 2009, Dad died. I was holding his hand when he took his last breath. He'd waited until Shira was better, just like he promised. The next 6 months were, well, we were all just trying to figure out how to exist in a world without him. Mom threw herself into work. My brother Ronnie got quiet, spending most of his time in his room. My younger sister Sabrina, who was only 12, would sometimes crawl into Dad's side of the bed at night, just to feel close to him. And Shira seemed to be doing okay physically, getting stronger every day. Then came September 6th, 2009. I was at my friend's house when my phone rang. It was Shira, and she was hysterical. "Chelsea, you need to come home right now." She was breathing so hard I could barely understand her. "What's wrong? Are you okay?" "I saw Dad," she whispered. "He was standing in the kitchen with his head down. He was crying, Chelsea. I tried to talk to him, but when I got closer, he was gone." I rushed home, convinced she was just having some kind of grief hallucination. When I got there, she was sitting on the kitchen floor, shaking. The weird thing was, the room was freezing cold, even though it was still pretty warm outside. "He was right here," she kept saying, pointing to the spot near the sink. Why was he crying? Why would he come back just to cry? I didn't know what to tell her. I got her up, made her some tea, and tried to calm her down. She eventually fell asleep on the couch, and I covered her with Dad's old flannel blanket. 2 weeks later, Shira collapsed at home. Her lymphoma was back, and this time it was everywhere. Her lymph nodes, her bones, her liver. It happened so fast the doctors couldn't believe it. One day, she was in remission. The next, she was terminal. They admitted her to the hospital on September 18th. I'd never seen anyone decline so quickly. It was like something was pulling her away from us, hour by hour. By the 19th, she could barely speak, and she was so weak she couldn't even press the call button for the nurse. That night, Ronnie was sitting with her while Mom and I went to get coffee. When we came back, Ronnie looked pale and shaken. He showed us Shira's phone. She'd typed a message to him. Heaven is real. God is real. Dad and Grandpa are here. Ronnie told us how she'd pointed weakly to the corner of the room, her eyes following something none of us could see. When he asked what they wanted, she just pointed to herself. I stayed with her that night, holding her hand, telling her stories about when we were kids. Around 3 a.m, she squeezed my hand 3 times, our family's code for "I love you," and then she was gone. She was 19 years old. I had to fly to Washington the next day for work. I couldn't get out of it, and honestly, maybe I needed the distraction. I was exhausted, but couldn't sleep in the hotel room. I kept seeing Shira's face, how peaceful she looked at the end. I finally dozed off around midnight. In my dream, Dad was standing at the foot of my bed. He looked healthy again, like before he got sick. Next to him was his cousin Jennifer, who had died just 2 months before him from a heart attack. They were both smiling. "Chelsea," Dad said, "we came to tell you that Shira's with us now. She's okay." I woke up suddenly, my heart pounding. My phone was ringing. It was Ronnie, calling to tell me Shira had died, but I already knew. The next few months were a blur. Mom seemed to age 10 years in a matter of weeks, losing a husband and a daughter in the same year. I don't know how she kept going. We all moved through life like ghosts, just going through the motions. Then came January 10th, 2010. Most of the family had gone sledding at the park. Mom thought it would be good for everyone to get out of the house. I stayed home with Sabrina because she had a cold. We were both napping in Mom's bed. Sabrina had been sleeping there since Dad died. I don't know how long we'd been asleep when I heard someone call my name. Chelsea, clear as day, right next to my ear. I opened my eyes and saw smoke pouring under the bedroom door. My first thought was Sabrina. I shook her awake, but she was groggy and confused. The smoke was getting thicker by the second, and I couldn't see more than a few inches in front of me. I pulled Sabrina out of bed and onto the floor where the air was clearer. "We need to crawl to the door," I told her, trying to keep my voice calm even though I was terrified. "Stay low and follow me." The smoke was so thick I couldn't see the door, even though it was only about 10 feet away. I started crawling, pulling Sabrina behind me, but I got disoriented. The smoke was burning my eyes and lungs, and Sabrina was coughing so hard she could barely move. That's when I heard it again. "Chelsea, this way." A voice, Dad's voice, coming from my right. I turned toward it and kept crawling, pulling Sabrina with me. My hand hit the door and I reached up to feel for the knob. It was hot, but not too hot to touch. I opened it and a wall of even thicker smoke rushed in. I almost gave up then. I couldn't see, could barely breathe, and had no idea which way to go. But the voice came again, clearer now. "Down the hall to your left. Hurry." I followed it, crawling as fast as I could with Sabrina right behind me. We made it to the front door somehow, and I fumbled with the lock, my hands shaking so badly I could barely turn it. When we finally got outside, we collapsed on the front lawn, gulping in the cold winter air. The fire department arrived minutes later. They said the fire had started in the kitchen, electrical fault in the wiring. The whole house went up in less than 20 minutes. The firefighters told us that if we'd stayed in that room even 30 seconds longer, we wouldn't have made it out alive. Later at the hospital, the doctor said we both had carbon monoxide in our blood and some minor smoke inhalation, but we'd be okay. When he stepped out, Sabrina turned to me. "Did you hear it too?" she asked quietly. "Hear what?" "The voice. Dad's voice. He was telling us where to go." I couldn't speak for a moment. I'd thought I was hallucinating from the smoke, that my brain had conjured Dad's voice because I was scared, but Sabrina heard it too. "Yeah," I finally said. "I heard him. It's been years now, and I still don't know what to make of all this. Was it really Dad watching over us? Did he somehow know Shira was going to join him soon? And how did he save us from the fire? I'm not particularly religious, and I've tried to find logical explanations. Grief can do strange things to your mind. Smoke inhalation can cause hallucinations. Coincidences happen. But sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I remember Shira's last message. Heaven is real. God is real. Dad and Grandpa are here. And I wonder if maybe there's something between life and death that we don't understand. Some shadow place where those we've lost can still reach back to us when we need them most. All I know for sure is that something was with us during those terrible months. Something I can't explain, and sometimes when the house is quiet and I'm alone, I swear I can feel them still watching over us. Story. I still can't go to the beach without scanning every face in the crowd. It's been 22 years, but I can't shake the feeling of being watched. I'm 32 now, married with a daughter of my own, but what happened that summer day in 2001 still haunts me. It was early August, one of those scorching days where the sand burns your feet and the air feels thick with humidity. My family had this tradition of getting together at Sandpiper Beach for an annual cookout. Nothing fancy, just burgers, hot dogs, and my uncle's famous potato salad that everyone pretended to like. That year, my parents, aunt, uncle, 6-year-old cousin Lily and I had staked out a spot near the lifeguard tower. I remember being annoyed that morning because my mom made me wear this stupid blue rash guard shirt. "You burned your shoulders last time, Ethan," she'd said, tugging it over my head like I was still a baby instead of a 10-year-old. I was at that age where I thought I knew everything, and the last thing I wanted was to look different from the cool, older kids with their tanned shoulders. After lunch, the adults were in that lazy post-meal mode. My dad half asleep under an umbrella, Mom reading some paperback thriller, and my aunt and uncle chatting while sipping those fruity drinks they'd smuggled in their cooler. Lily kept bugging me to build a sandcastle with her. I initially blew her off because I wanted to use my boogie board, but my mom gave me that look. You know, the one parents give that says, "Be nice to your little cousin or else." So we grabbed our plastic buckets and shovels and headed toward the shoreline, not too far, maybe 30 feet from where our parents sat, definitely within their line of sight. I remember checking to make sure they could see us, something my parents had drilled into me since I was little. The spot we picked was perfect, damp enough that the sand would hold its shape, but not so close to the water that waves would destroy our masterpiece. Lily was in that phase where everything was mine, my shovel, my bucket, my castle. But I didn't mind. She looked up to me, and honestly, I liked being the cool older cousin. We'd been building for maybe 45 minutes. Our castle was actually turning out pretty awesome. 4 towers with a moat around it, and Lily had decorated it with seashells she'd collected. I was digging the moat deeper when I first noticed them, a couple standing maybe 10 feet away watching us. Just watching, not talking to each other, not looking at the ocean, just staring directly at us. They seemed so out of place that at first I thought they were looking for someone behind us, but when I glanced back, there was nothing but open beach. The man was tall and lanky with this shaggy brown hair that hung in his eyes. He wore long jeans, actual jeans, not swim trunks, on a 90-degree beach day. The woman beside him had this platinum blonde hair pulled back in a tight ponytail and wore these massive black sunglasses that covered half her face. She had on a loose white sundress that went down to her knees. What really struck me as weird was how clean they looked. Everyone else on the beach had that slightly disheveled, sandy look. You know, hair messy from the wind, skin glistening with sweat or sunscreen, clothes with little wet patches or sand clinging to them. But these two looked pristine. Their clothes were completely dry and clean. No beach bag, no towels, no cooler, nothing. I nudged Lily and whispered, "Let's move closer to Mom and Dad." But before we could get up, the couple approached us. "That's a really great sandcastle," the man said, his voice oddly flat despite the compliment. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Thank you," I muttered, instinctively shifting to put myself slightly between Lily and these strangers. The woman tilted her head at an unnatural angle, her smile widening until it looked painful. "You did such a good job. How old are you two?" Before I could answer, the man cut in. "Let me guess, you're 10, he pointed at me, and you're 6, he pointed at Lily. My stomach dropped. He was exactly right. How could he know that? We weren't wearing anything with our ages on it, and while maybe Lily looked 6, kids my age can look anywhere from 8 to 12. We have children just your ages, the woman said, still with that frozen smile. They'd love to meet you. I looked around for their kids, but there weren't any nearby, just the two of them standing there like mannequins with those fixed expressions. "Where are they?" Lily asked innocently, and I wanted to clap my hand over her mouth. "Not far," the man said, taking a small step closer. "Just over the dunes in our beach house. We have video games and ice cream. All kinds of treats." My parents' warnings about strangers crashed through my mind like alarm bells. Don't talk to people you don't know. Never go anywhere with strangers. Always stay where we can see you. The woman took off her sunglasses and I almost gasped. Her eyes were this pale, washed-out blue that looked almost white in the sunlight. They didn't blink enough. "You should come with us," she said, not as a question or invitation, as a command. Her voice had this weird tone to it, like she was trying to hypnotize us. I felt Lily shifting closer to me, finally sensing something was wrong. The beach around us was packed with people, but suddenly it felt like we were completely alone with these two strangers. "Our parents are right there," I said, pointing to where my family sat under their umbrellas. My dad had dozed off completely, my mom was engrossed in her book, and my aunt and uncle were facing away from us, looking out at the water. "It'll only take a minute," the man said, extending his hand toward Lily. "Your parents won't even notice you're gone." That's when I noticed his hands. They were too smooth, like he'd never worked a day in his life. No calluses, no tan lines, nothing. Just these perfectly clean, pale hands reaching for my little cousin. Something primal kicked in. This overwhelming need to protect Lily mixed with absolute terror. But I knew if I panicked, they might grab us both. "I'll be right back," I said suddenly, faking enthusiasm. "I just need to tell my mom something. Then we can go see your beach house." The woman's smile faltered just slightly, and the man's eyes narrowed. "Your sister can wait here with us," the woman said, reaching for Lily's shoulder. "She's not my sister, she's my cousin," I corrected automatically, then immediately regretted giving them any information. "And my aunt said we have to stay together." I grabbed Lily's hand and started backing away. "We'll be right back, I promise." The man took a step forward. "We don't have much time," he said in a low voice that sent chills down my spine despite the blistering heat. "1 minute, I insisted, pulling Lily with me as I turned and started walking quickly, not running, because I was afraid that would trigger them to chase us. The moment we were a safe distance away, I broke into a sprint, dragging Lily along as she complained about leaving her shovel behind. "Mom! Mom!" I yelled as we approached our spot. She looked up, annoyed at first until she saw my face. "What's wrong?" she asked, instantly alert. "There's these weird people trying to get us to go to their beach house," I gasped out. "They knew how old we are." My aunt jumped up immediately. "Where's this couple now?" "By our sand castle," I said, pointing back to where we'd been playing. My aunt and mom rushed toward the spot while my dad, now awake, stayed with us. When they returned a few minutes later, my mom looked pale. "There's no one there," she said, "just the castle and your toys." "But they were right there," I insisted. The man had brown, shaggy hair and jeans, and the lady had this creepy smile and huge sunglasses. My aunt knelt down beside Lily. "Did these people talk to you, sweetie?" Lily nodded. "They said they had ice cream and games." My mom and aunt exchanged a look that, even at 10, I recognized as pure fear. We packed up immediately. My dad and uncle walked the beach in both directions looking for the couple while my mom reported the incident to the lifeguard and a nearby police officer. They never found them. It was like they'd vanished into thin air. For weeks afterward, I had nightmares. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, convinced the pale-eyed woman was standing in the corner of my room with that frozen smile. My parents took me to a counselor who said I'd done exactly the right thing by getting an adult instead of confronting the strangers directly. But here's what still haunts me. For those brief seconds when I left Lily to run to my parents, she was alone with them. Anything could have happened in that moment. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night thinking about what would have happened if I'd hesitated even a few seconds longer. The police said they matched the description of a couple suspected in 2 child abduction attempts in neighboring beach towns that same summer. In both cases, they approached children playing away from their parents, knew details about the kids they shouldn't have known, and tried to lure them away with promises of treats and games. I've spent years trying to make sense of it. How did they know our ages so precisely? Had they been watching us all day? Were they locals who somehow knew our family? Why didn't anyone else on that crowded beach notice how out of place they looked? The detail that still makes my skin crawl was something the police officer told my parents when they thought I wasn't listening. In both of the other attempted abductions, the couple had specifically targeted pairs of children, one older, one younger. They would try to separate them, focus on the younger child while isolating the older one. I became fiercely protective of Lily after that. At family gatherings, I wouldn't let her out of my sight. My aunt noticed and pulled me aside once to tell me I didn't need to feel responsible, that adults should have been watching us more carefully that day. But I still feel it, that guilt, that knowledge that I left her alone, even for those few seconds, that if I'd made a different choice, if I'd gone with them to see their beach house, or if I'd frozen in fear instead of running for help, both of us might have disappeared that day. I have a daughter now, she's 4. I've never taken her to a beach. My wife thinks I'm being overprotective when I insist on being able to see her at all times at the playground, or when I quiz her preschool about their security procedures. How can I explain that I know exactly how quickly children can vanish, how predators can appear completely normal until the moment they're not? Sometimes I still look up news stories about missing children, wondering if any of them encountered that same couple with their perfect clothes and empty smiles. I wonder if those other kids were as lucky as we were. The most terrifying part? Those people are probably still out there, still approaching children on crowded beaches, still somehow knowing details they shouldn't know, still wearing those artificial smiles that never reach their eyes. And I'm still wondering if someday I'll turn around at a crowded place and see a tall man with shaggy brown hair standing next to a blonde woman with oversized sunglasses, both of them watching us with those knowing smiles, as if they've been waiting 22 years to finish what they started. Story 13. I'm not usually one to talk about this kind of stuff, but it's been years now and I still can't explain what happened in my house back in 2017. I've always considered myself pretty logical, not the type to jump at shadows or believe in the paranormal, but sometimes you experience something that just doesn't fit into your understanding of the world. It started with Rex, my German Shepherd. I'd had him since he was a puppy, and by 2017, he was about 5 years old, smart as hell and completely in tune with my routines. We lived in this 3-bedroom house I was renting at the time. Nothing special, just a typical suburban place with a small yard. Rex was the perfect dog, loyal, protective, and always responsive when I called him. The first time I noticed something off was around March that year. I remember because it was still chilly in the evenings, and I had just settled in to watch some Netflix after work. I was sitting in my recliner when I realized Rex wasn't lounging at my feet like usual. I looked around and found him standing completely still in the doorway between the kitchen and the lounge room. At first, I didn't think much of it. Dogs do weird stuff sometimes, but after about 10 minutes of him just staring into the empty lounge room, I started to feel uneasy. His ears were perked forward, his body tense. "Rex, come here, boy," I called, patting my leg. Nothing, not even a tail wag. This was weird because Rex always came when I called him, always. I got up and walked over, ruffled the fur on his neck. "What are you looking at, buddy?" His eyes never moved from whatever spot in the lounge room had his attention. I followed his gaze but saw nothing. Just my couch, coffee table and TV against the wall. The room was dimly lit by the kitchen light spilling in, but otherwise normal. I shrugged it off, figuring maybe he'd heard a mouse in the walls or something. Eventually, I managed to coax him away with a treat, and we went to bed. But a week later, it happened again. Same time, around 11 p.m., same stance, same intense focus on the lounge room. This time I actually went into the room and turned on the lights, thinking maybe there was an insect or something crawling on the wall that I couldn't see from where I was standing. Nothing. By the third time it happened, I started keeping track. It was always between 11 p.m. and midnight, never earlier, never later. And it wasn't every night, maybe once a week at first, then gradually more frequent as the months went on. By June, it was happening 3 or 4 times a week. I'd be doing the dishes or watching TV, and Rex would just silently get up, walk to that same spot, and stare, sometimes for 10 minutes, sometimes for nearly an hour. It was really starting to freak me out. What made it worse was that the lounge room was where I spent most of my evenings. It was where my TV was, my comfortable couch, my books. But now, every time I sat in there after dark, I felt watched. Like someone was standing just behind me, breathing on my neck. I started leaving the lights on all the time, which jacked up my electricity bill, but I couldn't handle sitting in there with just the glow of the TV anymore. One night in July, a really hot, sticky summer night, I was up late working on my laptop. Rex had been in his usual spot, staring into the lounge room for about 20 minutes. It was nearly midnight, and I was getting that familiar crawling sensation on the back of my neck. I decided enough was enough. I was going to see what he was seeing. I got up and stood next to Rex, trying to align my line of sight exactly with his. The lounge room was dark, except for the faint blue glow from my laptop screen on the coffee table. At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Then, as my eyes adjusted further to the darkness, I saw something. It wasn't clear at first, just a slightly different shade of darkness, like a gray smudge against the black, a vague human-shaped outline, just floating there between the couch and the far wall, not moving, not doing anything, just existing in a space where nothing should be. I blinked hard, convinced my eyes were playing tricks on me. When I opened them again, there was nothing there, just the normal shadows of my furniture. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Rex was still staring, completely focused on that same spot. "Did you see that?" I whispered to him, feeling ridiculous for talking to my dog but needing some kind of confirmation that I wasn't losing my mind. His ears twitched at my voice, but his eyes never moved from that spot. I convinced myself it was just eye strain from staring at my laptop too long. Went to bed that night with all the lights on in the hallway and bathroom. Didn't sleep much. By August, I was seriously considering moving out. The incidents with Rex were happening almost every night now, and I'd started seeing that gray figure more frequently. Always in the same area of the lounge room, always between 11 and midnight, always disappearing the moment I blinked or tried to focus directly on it. I remember one night particularly clearly. It was a Tuesday, and I'd had a shitty day at work. My boss had been on my case about a project I was behind on, and I'd gotten stuck in traffic for over an hour on the way home. All I wanted was to crack open a beer, watch some mindless TV, and forget about everything for a while. I was sprawled on the couch halfway through my second beer when Rex took up his position in the doorway. I groaned out loud. "Not tonight. I couldn't deal with this tonight." "Rex, come on," I said, patting the couch next to me. "There's nothing there, buddy." But of course, he didn't move. His hackles weren't raised, he wasn't growling, just staring with that unnerving intensity. I tried to ignore him and focus on the show I was watching, but that creeping sensation of being observed was overwhelming. Finally, I muted the TV and turned to look at the spot Rex was fixated on. This time, I saw it immediately. The gray figure was more distinct than before. It was definitely human-shaped. I could make out what seemed like shoulders, a head, even the suggestion of arms. It was hovering about a foot off the ground, near the stack of moving boxes I still hadn't unpacked. Yeah, I'd been there over a year and still had boxes. Judge me. What was different this time was that the figure seemed to be partially hidden behind the boxes, with just its head and one shoulder visible, as if it was peeking around them to look at me, like it was hiding, but still watching. I felt ice cold despite the summer heat. The figure didn't move, didn't approach, just observed. I stared back for what felt like forever, but was probably only seconds before I instinctively blinked, and once again it vanished. That night, I called my dad. We're not a family that talks about feelings much, but I was at my wit's end. I tried to sound casual as I asked if he'd ever experienced anything, unusual in any of the houses we'd lived in when I was growing up. There was a long pause before he answered. "You seeing something in that house, Jake?" The fact that he jumped straight to that conclusion instead of asking what I meant threw me. "Maybe," I admitted. "I don't know. Rex keeps staring at this one spot in the lounge room, and sometimes I think I see something." Another long pause. "Your grandmother used to say she could see things others couldn't," he finally said. I never knew if I believed her, but there were times. He trailed off, then cleared his throat. "Look, son, I don't know what happens when people die, but I think sometimes their energy stays behind. If you're seeing something, it's probably just someone who's confused, who doesn't know they should move on." "So what am I supposed to do about it?" I asked, feeling slightly hysterical. "Call a priest? Burn sage? Move out?" "Just tell it to go away," he said simply. "Be firm. Tell it, this is your house now, and it needs to leave." I thanked him and hung up, feeling both relieved that he hadn't thought I was crazy and ridiculous for considering talking to an empty room. The next night, when Rex took up his position, I steeled myself. I was going to do it. I was going to talk to whatever was in my lounge room. I stood next to Rex, took a deep breath, and waited until I could see the gray figure forming in the darkness near those damn boxes. There it was, more defined than ever. I could almost make out features on what would be its face, though they were blurry and indistinct. It seemed to be looking right at me, and for the first time I felt like it knew I could see it. I opened my mouth to firmly tell it to leave, just like my dad had suggested. But the words stuck in my throat. I was paralyzed with a fear so primal that I could barely breathe, let alone speak. The figure didn't move, didn't make any threatening gesture, but something about being acknowledged by it turned my blood to ice. "Go away," I finally managed to whisper, the words barely audible even to myself. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, so subtly I almost missed it, the figure seemed to recede slightly, moving further behind the boxes until only the top of its head was visible. That night, I slept on the couch in the living room with all the lights on, Rex curled up protectively at my feet. I was too scared to go to my bedroom, which required walking through the lounge room. The strangest part of this whole story is how it ended, or didn't end, really. After that night when I whispered for it to leave, Rex never took up his watching position again. He went back to being his normal self, following me around the house, responding to commands, lounging at my feet while I watched TV. The lounge room felt normal again, just a room, not a space filled with dread. I never saw the gray figure again, though for months afterward I would catch myself staring at that spot by the boxes, half expecting to see something. Eventually, I even unpacked those boxes, partly to convince myself there was nothing hiding behind them. I still live in the same house. Sometimes, when I'm up late and the house is quiet, I get a flash of that old feeling, like I'm not alone, like someone is watching. But it passes quickly, and Rex never reacts, so I tell myself it's just my imagination, just the memory of those weird months playing tricks on me. But I know what I saw. And more importantly, I know what Rex saw. Dogs don't imagine things, don't get caught up in ghost stories or urban legends. Rex saw something in that lounge room night after night, something that was there until I told it not to be. I've never had another experience like it, and honestly, I hope I never do. But it's changed how I think about the world, about what might exist just beyond what we can normally perceive. And sometimes, late at night, I still find myself whispering, "Stay away," to the empty corners of my house, just in case. Story 14. I still wake up in cold sweats some nights, thinking about what I found in those woods near the Canadian border. It's been 10 years, but the memory is still as fresh as if it happened yesterday. Back in the fall of 2013, I was in a pretty dark place. My divorce had just been finalized a few months earlier, and at 31, I felt like my life was falling apart. I needed to get away from everything. From the empty house outside Missoula that still had faint traces of my ex-wife's perfume, from the pitying looks of friends who didn't know what to say anymore, from the suffocating routine that reminded me daily of what I'd lost. I'd always found peace in the outdoors, so I decided to take a solo camping trip up north near the Canadian border. The area was remote, exactly what I needed. No cell service, no people, just me and my thoughts in the wilderness for a few days. I packed light, tent, sleeping bag, enough food for 5 days, basic survival gear, and my dad's old hunting knife. I didn't even bring a gun, which is unusual for Montana folks heading into bear country, but I wasn't thinking clearly back then. The first day was perfect. I hiked about 7 miles into the backcountry before setting up camp near a small stream. The fall colors were incredible, deep reds and golds against the dark green pines. I remember feeling the first real sense of peace I'd had in months as I sat by my small fire that evening watching the stars come out. I actually slept well that night, the sound of the stream drowning out the usual thoughts that kept me awake. The second morning started normally. I made coffee on my portable stove and ate some oatmeal while planning a day hike to a ridge I'd spotted on my map. That's when I noticed something odd around my campsite. At first, I thought it was just disturbed leaves or animal tracks, but as I looked closer, I realized they were human footprints, barefoot human footprints. They circled my entire campsite, a complete loop around where I'd been sleeping. The prints weren't there the evening before. I would have noticed them while gathering wood. Someone had walked around my tent while I was sleeping, barefoot, in October, in Montana. I tried to rationalize it, maybe another hiker playing a prank, but I hadn't seen anyone for miles, and who hikes barefoot in near-freezing temperatures? The prints weren't deep, the suggestion that whoever made them was lightweight, but they were definitely human. I checked my gear. Nothing was missing. I even checked the knife under my pillow, still there. I almost packed up right then, but something stubborn in me refused to let this ruin my trip. Instead, I decided to be more cautious. I moved my campsite about half a mile away, closer to a rock face that would protect my back. I gathered extra firewood and kept my knife within reach at all times. That night, I barely slept. Every crack of a twig sent me bolt upright, straining to see through the darkness. The third day is when everything changed. I decided to take that hike to the ridge, thinking the higher ground might help me spot if anyone else was in the area. About 2 miles from my campsite, in a small clearing surrounded by dense pines, I found it, a structure that had no business being there. It was a perfect square made of logs, about 4 feet on each side, stacked like a low wall. Inside was a mound of dirt that looked recently disturbed. No forest ranger would build something like this. No hiker would waste the energy. It was deliberate, almost ritual looking. I should have walked away. Every instinct told me to turn around and head back to my camp, pack up and get the hell out of those woods. But curiosity has always been my downfall. I used a fallen branch to dig into the mound. About 2 feet down, I hit something solid, a metal case, military style, olive green, with a heavy-duty latch. It took some effort to pull it out of the dirt. It wasn't extremely heavy, maybe 20 pounds, but awkward to handle. I remember sitting there for a few minutes, just staring at it, mud caked on my hands, heart pounding. Opening that case was probably the biggest mistake of my life, but at the time, it felt like I'd found buried treasure. Inside was a shotgun, not a standard one you'd buy at a sporting goods store. This was custom-built, compact, with PDR etched crudely into the stock. Beside it were boxes of ammunition, a pair of thick leather gloves stained with something dark, and a waterproof journal. The journal is what made my blood run cold. It contained entries from someone who seemed to be tracking something in these woods. The handwriting started neat but became increasingly erratic in later entries. I'll never forget some of those phrases. Day 17. Found fresh remains again. Same clean cuts, too precise for any animal. Day 23. Caught glimpse of it near the stream. Not what I expected. Faster than it should be. Day 29. It knows I'm tracking it now. Found my previous camp destroyed. All supplies gone except this case. Always keep it buried when not in use. The final entry was just 3 days old. If you're reading this, I failed. Rebury everything. The weapon doesn't stop it. It just makes it angry. Don't try to find me. Don't keep anything. Rebury it all and leave these woods. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely close the journal. The rational part of my brain tried to dismiss it as some elaborate hoax or the ravings of a mentally ill person, but those barefoot prints around my tent kept flashing in my mind. I repacked everything into the case, intending to rebury it as instructed, but as I started scooping dirt back into the hole, a sound from the woods behind me made me freeze. It wasn't a typical forest sound, not a bird or squirrel or even a larger predator. It was a soft, rhythmic tapping, like someone gently knocking on tree trunks in sequence, moving in a circle around the clearing. I grabbed the case and ran. I didn't even try to be quiet, just crashed through the underbrush back toward my campsite, the metal case banging against my leg the whole way. When I reached my tent, I didn't stop to pack properly. I stuffed what I could into my backpack, abandoned the rest, and kept moving toward the trailhead. The 7 miles back to my truck felt like 70. Every shadow seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at it. Twice I thought I heard footsteps matching mine, stopping when I stopped. The case grew heavier with each mile, but I couldn't bring myself to drop it. By the time I reached my truck, the sun was setting, and I was nearly hysterical. I threw everything in the back, including the case, and drove straight home without stopping once. Not for food, not for gas, not even to use the bathroom. I just needed to get as far away from those woods as possible. Back at my house, I locked all the doors and windows, then sat on my kitchen floor with the case beside me until morning. In the daylight, everything seemed less threatening. I opened the case again and examined the contents more carefully. The shotgun was definitely custom, shortened barrel, modified stock, not something you'd find in stores. The ammunition wasn't standard either. The shells were longer than normal and had been hand-loaded. The journal contained about 50 pages of entries, spanning 2 months. The writer never identified themselves beyond those initials on the gun, PDR, but they described tracking something that had been killing wildlife, and they suspected at least one missing hiker. They never clearly described what they were hunting, which somehow makes it worse. Just vague references to unnatural movement and wrong proportions. One entry mentioned eyes that reflect light wrong, not red or green like animals, but blue, deep blue. After reading the entire journal, I hid the case in my garage, behind some boxes of stuff from my marriage that I'd never unpacked. I told myself I'd figure out what to do with it later, maybe turn it in to the police or park rangers. But days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and now into years. I never reported anything, never went back to those woods, never told anyone about what I found. I've moved twice since then, and each time the case comes with me. It's in my garage now, still hidden. I've checked on it periodically, sometimes going months without looking at it, other times checking it weekly. Everything remains exactly as I found it. The thing is, I'm afraid to get rid of it. The journal warned to rebury everything, not destroy it or throw it away. Like the case is some kind of, I don't know, containment, a barrier. What if disposing of it incorrectly somehow invites back whatever the journal's author was hunting, or what might have been hunting them in those woods? I've researched missing persons cases around that area for the past decade. There have been 3 unexplained disappearances since 2013, all solo hikers, all during fall months. None of the bodies ever recovered. Sometimes I wake up at night thinking I hear that same tapping sound on the walls of my house. Tap, 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 moving in sequence around my bedroom. On particularly bad nights, I swear I can make out barefoot prints in the carpet, visible for just a moment when the moonlight hits at the right angle. I know what you're thinking. Just get rid of the damn thing, throw it in a lake, turn it in anonymously, something. But you didn't read that journal. You didn't feel the absolute dread that saturated those pages. Whatever PDR was hunting, or whatever was hunting them, it's connected to that case somehow. And until I know for certain what that connection is, I can't risk breaking it. So the case stays hidden, and I keep checking on it, and I never ever go camping alone anymore. Sometimes I think about driving back up there, finding that clearing again, and reburying everything like I was supposed to. But what if it's waiting for me? What if it's been waiting all this time for the case to return? So here I am, 10 years later, still haunted by what I found in those woods, still keeping a shotgun I've never fired and a journal I wish I'd never read, still listening for that tapping sound in the night, and still wondering if those footprints around my tent that night were coming toward me, or leading away from something much worse. Asimart. Story 15. I still get goosebumps thinking about what happened last month. I've been debating whether to post this for weeks, but I need to get it off my chest. Maybe someone here has seen something similar or has an explanation, because I sure as hell don't. My friends and I work at a tech company in Denver. Marissa, Dylan, Jake, and me. We'd been talking about disconnecting completely for months. No phones, no GPS, no gadgets. Just us, some maps, and basic gear. We're all decent hikers, though none of us would call ourselves wilderness experts. We chose a remote area about 3 hours west of Denver. It wasn't on any of the popular trails or camping spots. That was the whole point. We wanted to test ourselves and truly get away from civilization. Dylan had found some topographic maps of the region, and we spent a few weekends planning our route. The drive out was filled with the usual jokes and excitement. We parked at this tiny, unmarked trailhead that barely had space for our 2 cars. The morning air was crisp, around 50 degrees, with that clean mountain smell that instantly clears your head. I remember feeling so optimistic as we shouldered our packs and headed out. The first day's hike was exhausting but beautiful. We covered about 10 miles, climbing steadily through pine forests. Occasionally, we'd emerge into meadows dotted with wildflowers where we could see the mountains stretching out around us. By late afternoon, we found the perfect spot to make camp, a flat area protected by a rocky outcrop with a small creek gurgling nearby. Setting up camp was straightforward. We had 2 tents, one for Marissa and me, one for the guys. We cooked a simple meal of dehydrated pasta on our little camp stove and sat around talking as darkness fell. The stars out there were incredible, not a hint of light pollution. I remember feeling totally at peace. The next morning, we decided to explore the area west of our camp. We packed day bags with water, snacks, first aid supplies, and extra layers. The plan was to head out for about 4 hours, have lunch, then return to camp before dark. The terrain was challenging. No trails, just us navigating with map and compass through dense forest, over fallen logs, and across small streams. The morning passed quickly as we picked our way through the wilderness, marking our path on the map as we went. Around midday, we crested a small ridge and spotted something odd below us, what looked like an animal trail cutting through the underbrush. It wasn't on our map, but it headed downhill in roughly the direction we wanted to go. "Should we follow it?" Jake asked. "Why not?" Dylan replied. "Might be easier than bushwhacking." So we did. The path twisted downhill for maybe half a mile before suddenly opening into a clearing. And that's when things got weird. The clearing was almost perfectly circular, about 100 yards across. In the center stood an old cabin made of hand-hewn logs. The roof sagged in the middle, and the door hung crookedly on rusty hinges. The windows were just empty frames, dark and empty like eye sockets. But the cabin itself wasn't what stopped us in our tracks. It was the zone around it. There was a visible boundary, about 50 feet out from the cabin in all directions. Inside this circle, everything looked wrong. The grass was yellow and patchy, like it had been scorched. The few bushes were brown and brittle, and scattered across the ground were small animal carcasses, squirrels, birds, even a couple of rabbits. What struck me immediately was how the animals looked. They weren't bloody or torn apart like predator kills. They were just dried out, like mummies. Some were recent, others looked like they'd been there for months. And the silence. Oh God, the silence. Outside this circle, the forest was alive with sound. Birds calling, insects buzzing, leaves rustling. But inside, nothing. Absolute stillness. What the actual fuck? Marissa whispered, grabbing my arm. None of us answered. We just stood there, staring. Jake was the first to move. He picked up a stick and tossed it into the circle. It landed with a dull thud on the dead grass. Nothing happened. I'm going to check it out, Dylan said, taking a step forward. Don't, I said, surprising myself with how forcefully it came out. Something's not right here. Instead of entering, we decided to circle around the perimeter. That's when we noticed the fallen tree on the north side. It had fallen across the boundary line. The part outside the circle was normal, covered in green moss with mushrooms growing from it. But the section inside the circle, grey, brittle with bark peeling away like old skin, the line where it changed was razor sharp. No gradual transition. It was as if someone had drawn an invisible circle, and everything inside it was just wrong. Could it be some kind of chemical spill? Jake suggested, though he didn't sound convinced. In a perfect circle? Marissa countered. And what about the cabin? Someone built that. We continued circling, keeping well away from the boundary. From certain angles, I swear I could see something in the cabin windows, just a flicker of movement at the edge of my vision. But whenever I looked directly, there was nothing there. The whole time I had this pressure in my ears, like when you're about to get a nosebleed, and a weird metallic taste in my mouth. Dylan mentioned feeling it too. After about 20 minutes of observing from a safe distance, we'd seen enough. None of us wanted to hang around any longer, and definitely none of us wanted to eat lunch anywhere near that place. We headed back uphill, following our original path. No one spoke much until we were well away from the clearing. Once we stopped for water, the questions started flowing. Did anyone recognize what type of cabin that was? Jake asked. He works in historic preservation when he's not coding, so he knows his architecture. Looked pre-1900 to me, he continued without waiting for an answer. Those logs were hand-hewn, not machine-cut. Whoever built it was using pretty primitive tools. But who would build a cabin way out here? Marissa asked. There's no road access, no water source nearby that I could see. Maybe there was back then, I suggested. The landscape changes. Not enough to explain that, Dylan said, shaking his head. And it doesn't explain the dead zone around it. We spent the rest of the hike back to camp throwing theories around. Toxic waste dumping, some kind of fungus or plant disease, a magnetic anomaly. None of them fit all the facts. That night at camp, the mood was different. We made dinner and tried to joke around like normal, but the cabin was all we could think about. As darkness fell, I noticed we were all glancing nervously into the woods, as if expecting to see something emerge from between the trees. Around the campfire, Dylan pulled out a small bottle of whiskey he'd packed. Didn't think we'd need this, he said, taking a swig before passing it around. But here we are. The alcohol helped a little, but not much. We decided to turn in early and head back to the cars first thing in the morning. No one mentioned extending the trip as we'd originally planned. I don't think any of us slept well. I kept waking up, convinced I could hear footsteps outside the tent. Just before dawn, I woke to find Marissa sitting up, staring at the tent wall. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. "Hear what?" "Like scratching on the ground outside." We listened, but there was nothing. Eventually, we dozed off again. At first light, we packed up quickly. No one complained about cutting the trip short. The forest that had seemed so peaceful 2 days ago now felt oppressive, like it was watching us. The birds sounded different, their calls shorter, more urgent. The hike back was tense. We moved faster than we had on the way in, barely stopping to rest. Every snapping twig made us jump. I kept getting the feeling we were being followed, though whenever I looked back, there was nothing there. When we finally reached the cars, the relief was overwhelming. We threw our packs in the trunks and piled in, eager to get back to civilization. On the drive home, we tried to make sense of what we'd seen. Jake promised to research the area's history when we got back to Denver. Dylan wondered if we should report it to someone, the Forest Service maybe, or environmental authorities. Report what, exactly? Marissa asked. That we found a weird cabin with dead animals around it. They'll think we're crazy. She had a point. It's been 4 weeks now. Jake couldn't find any historical record of settlements in that specific area. The oldest maps he found didn't show any structures there. Dylan discovered there's no history of mining, chemical dumping, or military testing anywhere nearby. I've been having trouble sleeping. Sometimes I dream about the cabin. In my dreams, I walk across that boundary and approach the door. I never see what's inside, but I always wake up with my heart racing and that same metallic taste in my mouth. Yesterday, Marissa texted me a photo. It was a small brown bird lying on her porch, completely desiccated, like the animals we saw in the clearing. No signs of trauma or blood, just dried out. When I called her, she was in tears. It wasn't there when I left for work, she said. I swear it wasn't. I don't know what we encountered out there. Maybe it was something natural that science hasn't explained yet. Maybe it was something else entirely. But I know I'm never going back to those woods, and I'd advise anyone else to stay away too. Sometimes I wonder about that cabin. How long has it been there? Who built it? And most of all, is someone or something still living in it? Story 16. I still can't explain what happened that day in 2015, and honestly, I've tried to forget about it. But after browsing through similar experiences here, I figured I should share mine. Maybe someone has answers, or at least had something similar happen to them. My friend Melissa had just gotten approved for this apartment in Riverview, a decent 12-story building not far from where my wife and I lived with my mom. We were on the 10th floor, and Melissa was moving into a place on the 2nd. Nothing fancy, just your standard 2-bedroom with beige walls and that generic apartment carpet. It was a Saturday in August, hot as hell, and we'd rented a U-Haul for the day. My wife Sarah, my mom, and I had been helping Melissa move since around 8 in the morning. We were all exhausted, sweaty, and probably not thinking as clearly as we should have been. The building had those heavy fire doors with the automatic closing mechanisms. You know the type. They slam shut unless you prop them open. We'd been going back and forth between floors all day, so we weren't bothering to lock the doors. We just left them unlocked to make it easier since we were constantly moving between apartments. Around 2 in the afternoon, we'd mostly moved the big furniture, and we were working on the smaller boxes and random stuff. Sarah and Melissa went up to our place to grab some cleaning supplies we'd forgotten to bring down. Meanwhile, my mom and I headed back to the U-Haul to grab another load of boxes. The parking lot was about 50 yards from the building entrance. Nothing unusual happened as we walked to the truck. We grabbed as many boxes as we could carry. I had 3 stacked in my arms, and my mom had 2 smaller ones. We headed back, went through the lobby, and took the elevator to the 2nd floor. When we got to Melissa's apartment, Unit 211, the door was closed. No big deal. I figured it had just swung shut on its own, but when I tried the handle, it was locked. That's weird, I said to my mom. Did Melissa come back down? I thought she went upstairs with Sarah. My mom shrugged, shifting the boxes in her arms. Maybe she locked it out of habit? Just knock? So I did. I balanced the boxes against the wall with one hand and knocked with the other. We waited. Nothing. I knocked again, louder this time. Melissa, you in there? I called out. No answer. The hallway was completely silent except for the hum of the building's air conditioning. I remember thinking it was strange because we'd been in and out all day without locking the door once. Maybe she can't hear us, my mom suggested. Knock harder. I set my boxes down on the floor and pounded on the door with my fist. Still nothing. We stood there for about 10 minutes, occasionally knocking and calling out. The whole situation was getting annoying. We were tired, carrying heavy boxes, and just wanted to get this move over with. Let me try calling Sarah, I said, pulling out my phone. But before I could dial, something happened that I still can't explain. The doorknob started shaking. Not just jiggling slightly like someone was trying to turn it, but violently rattling like someone was frantically trying to lock or unlock it from the inside. The entire door was shaking in its frame. It wasn't subtle. The door was practically vibrating, making this awful rattling sound against the door frame. My mum and I just stared, frozen. This went on for a good 15 seconds. The weird part was there were no other sounds, no footsteps inside, no voices, nothing but the violent shaking of the door and doorknob. Then just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. Complete silence. "Melissa?" I called out again, my voice noticeably shakier than before. "Hey, can you open the door?" Nothing, just silence. I looked at my mom, and she had this expression I'd never seen before, a mixture of confusion and genuine fear. "That was strange," she whispered. "Should we keep knocking?" I asked. She shook her head. "Let's just leave the boxes here and go upstairs. Maybe they're back at our place by now." So that's what we did. We carefully stacked the boxes next to Melissa's door and headed to the elevator. Neither of us said much on the ride up to the 10th floor. I remember my heart was still racing and I kept replaying that violent doorknob shaking in my head. When we walked into our apartment, we found Sarah and Melissa sitting at our kitchen table drinking iced tea and chatting. They looked completely relaxed, like they'd been there for a while. "Hey," Sarah said casually. "We were wondering where you guys went." "We've been trying to get into Melissa's apartment," I said, feeling confused. The door was locked. Melissa looked up, frowning. "Locked? I haven't locked it once today. We've been going in and out all morning." "Well, it was definitely locked," my mom said. "We knocked for like 10 minutes. I hesitated before adding, "And then the doorknob started shaking, like violently shaking. We thought you were trying to open it from inside." Sarah and Melissa exchanged looks. "We've been up here for at least 20 minutes, Sarah said, just taking a break." "So there's nobody in your apartment right now?" I asked Melissa. She shook her head. "No, definitely not. Nobody has a key except me, and I haven't even made copies yet. The building manager has one, I guess, but why would they be in there?" I felt a chill run down my spine despite the August heat. The doorknob was shaking like crazy. The whole door was vibrating. "Maybe it was maintenance?" Sarah suggested, but she didn't sound convinced. Melissa looked concerned now. "They wouldn't go in without notifying me first, and they definitely wouldn't ignore you knocking." I needed to see for myself. "I'm going back down there. The boxes are still sitting outside your door." "I'll come with you," Melissa said, standing up. We took the elevator down to the 2nd floor. The boxes were exactly where we'd left them, stacked neatly beside her door. Melissa tried the handle, and it turned easily. The door was unlocked. She pushed it open, and we stepped inside. The apartment was exactly as we'd left it, half-unpacked boxes everywhere, furniture in disarray, nothing out of place. But more importantly, it was completely empty. No person, no animal, nothing that could have made that door shake like it did. "See?" Melissa said. "Nobody's here." We checked every room, every closet, even under the bed and behind the shower curtain. Nothing. The windows were all closed and locked from the inside. There was simply no way anyone could have been in there and then left without us seeing them. "I don't understand," I said, running my hand through my hair. That doorknob was shaking so hard I thought the door might break. It wasn't just a little movement, it was violent. Melissa looked around her new apartment, suddenly seeming less enthusiastic about living there. Maybe it was the building settling, or some kind of pressure change with the air conditioning, but I knew that wasn't it. Building noises don't make doorknobs rattle like someone's desperately trying to get out, and my mom had seen it too. It wasn't just my imagination. We finished moving Melissa in that day, but the mood had definitely shifted. We were all a bit on edge, especially me and my mom. Every time a door closed too loudly or the air conditioning kicked on, I'd jump. That night after we got home, my mom pulled me aside while Sarah was showering. "You saw it too, right?" she asked quietly. The door shaking. Yeah, I said. It wasn't normal. It felt like… She hesitated, like something was trying to get out, not in, out. That thought hadn't occurred to me, and it made the whole thing even creepier. She was right. It did seem more like something was trying to escape than trying to get in. Over the next few weeks, I kept asking Melissa if she'd noticed anything strange in her apartment. Noises, things moving, cold spots, anything. She always said no. She lived there for over 2 years without reporting a single unusual incident. Sometimes I wonder if my mom and I shared some kind of hallucination that day, but I know what I saw. That door was shaking with an intensity that can't be explained by normal means, and the fact that it was locked when Melissa insists she never locked it just adds another layer to the mystery. I've tried to come up with logical explanations. Maybe maintenance did go in and just didn't respond when we knocked. Maybe there was some kind of pressure issue with the building's ventilation system. Maybe the lock was faulty and jammed temporarily. But none of those explanations account for that violent shaking. None of them explain why someone would remain silent when we were clearly right outside knocking. And none of them explain the feeling of absolute dread that came over me in that moment. A feeling I can still recall perfectly 7 years later. I don't consider myself a believer in the paranormal, but that day in Riverview shook my skepticism. Whatever was manipulating that doorknob wasn't human. At least I hope it wasn't, because the alternative means someone was deliberately hiding in that empty apartment, frantically trying to keep us out, only to somehow vanish without a trace minutes later. To this day, my mum and I occasionally bring it up when we're alone. Remember that door, one of us will say, and the other will just nod. We don't need to elaborate. Some experiences stay with you, unexplained and unsettling. The shaking door in Riverview is mine. Story 17. I still can't explain what happened that day at my great-grandfather's abandoned horse farm. It's been 3 months. And I haven't slept properly since. I keep replaying everything in my head, trying to make sense of it, but I can't. I know what I saw, what I heard, and worst of all, my cousins heard it too. I'd been having a pretty decent summer before that day, just turned 18 in June, finished high school, working at the local hardware store to save up for community college. I've always had issues. The doctors call them hallucinations. Started when I was about 14. I'd see things that weren't there, hear voices sometimes. The meds help most days, and I've gotten pretty good at knowing what's real and what isn't. My cousins Jake and Matt were visiting from Columbus for the weekend. They're a few years older than me, and we've always gotten along well. We were bored out of our minds that Saturday afternoon in Mapleton, population barely 2,000, so I suggested we check out our great-grandfather's old horse farm on the edge of town. Nobody had lived there for almost 20 years, but my family still owned the property. It was mid-August, hot as hell but not unbearable. We took Matt's pickup truck down the old dirt road that leads to the farm. The place used to be beautiful from what my dad tells me. White fences, green pastures, horses everywhere. Now it's just overgrown fields, a collapsed barn, and the old farmhouse that's barely standing. As soon as we pulled up to the property, I felt off, like there was a weight pressing down on my chest. I felt similar things before my hallucinations start, so I did my quick mental checklist. Did I take my meds this morning? Yes. Was I stressed or sleep deprived? Not really. Was I drinking or doing anything stupid? Nope. This place is creepy as shit, Jake said as we got out of the truck. He wasn't wrong. The farmhouse had boarded windows, the porch was caving in, and the whole place had this eerie silence except for the constant buzzing of insects. Let's look around, Matt suggested, already heading toward the old garage where my great-grandfather kept his vintage Chevys. They were still there, covered in tarps, collecting dust. I remember my dad saying they'd be worth something someday, but nobody ever bothered to sell them. We wandered around for a bit, finding nothing but raccoon droppings, some dead squirrels, and what looked like deer bones scattered near the tree line. The place had been abandoned to nature, and nature had definitely taken over. About an hour into our exploration, we decided to check out the woods behind the property. There was an old trail that led through the trees, past a small creek, and eventually to a clearing where my dad used to take me hunting. That's when I saw it, the oak tree with the hunting stand. I stopped walking so suddenly that Jake bumped into me. "What's up?" he asked. I just stared at the tree. I knew that tree. I'd shot my first buck from that stand when I was 12. My dad and grandpa had been so proud. But something was wrong. The stand wasn't facing the clearing like it should have been. It was positioned on the opposite side of the trunk, facing deeper into the woods. "That stand is wrong," I said, pointing. Matt shrugged. "Maybe someone moved it?" "Nobody comes out here anymore," I replied. "And that thing is bolted to the tree. You'd need tools to move it." Jake laughed. "Maybe the tree grew around it or something." I knew he was joking, but I couldn't shake the uneasiness. Trees don't just rotate. Hunting stands don't just move themselves. But I let it go because I didn't want to seem crazy in front of my cousins. We continued along the trail, and that's when I heard it, the unmistakable sound of a door opening and then slamming shut. It wasn't distant. It sounded like it was just through the trees to our right. All three of us froze. "You guys heard that, right?" I asked, my heart suddenly pounding. They both nodded, looking around nervously. "There's nothing out here but the old cabin," I said quietly. My uncle had told me stories about that cabin. It belonged to my great-great-grandfather, who used it for wood cutting and butchering deer. But more importantly, my uncle had warned me very specifically, "If you ever hear strange noises in those woods, doors shutting, glass breaking, voices when there shouldn't be any, you get out of there immediately." Of course, being 18 and stupid, that warning just made me curious. "Let's check it out," I suggested, already moving toward the sound. Matt grabbed my arm. "Are you serious? That was creepy as hell." "It's probably just an animal that got inside," I said, trying to convince myself as much as them. "Or the wind knocked something over." Jake shook his head. "No way, man. That was a door. Someone's out here." "Then we should see who it is," I argued. "This is our family's property. If someone's squatting in the cabin, we should know." Matt and Jake exchanged looks. "Fine," Matt finally said, "but we're just going to look from outside. If someone's in there, we're calling the cops." We moved through the trees as quietly as we could. The cabin wasn't far, maybe 100 yards from the trail. It was small, just one room with a loft space built from logs that had darkened with age. The roof was covered in moss, and the single window on the side facing us was filthy but intact. As we got closer, I heard something else. Crying, a woman crying. Not a child, not an elderly person, but a woman in distress. The sound sent chills down my spine. "Do you hear that?" I whispered. Jake nodded, his face pale. Matt looked like he was ready to bolt. "Someone's in trouble," I said, moving closer to the cabin. "Tyler, wait," Matt hissed, but I ignored him. I crept up to the window and tried to wipe away some of the grime so I could see inside. Through the smudged glass, I made out a figure, a woman with long dark hair, wearing what looked like a white nightgown. She was standing in the middle of the cabin, her back to me, shoulders shaking as she sobbed. Then, in one horrifying motion, she raised her arm and I saw the glint of metal, a knife. Before I could react, she plunged it into her own stomach. "Holy shit!" I yelled, stumbling back from the window. Matt and Jake were already running back toward the trail. "Tyler, come on!" Jake shouted. But I couldn't leave. Someone had just stabbed herself. I had to help her. I rushed to the cabin door and pushed it open, nearly falling inside. "Hello? Are you okay? We need to get you help." The cabin was empty, not just empty of people. It was clean, too clean for a place that had been abandoned for decades. The floor was swept. The small table and chair in the corner looked recently used, and there was a kerosene lamp on the table that looked new, but no woman, no blood, no knife. "What the hell?" I muttered, turning in a circle. There was nowhere she could have gone. The cabin had one door, the window I'd looked through, and a small loft area accessible by a ladder. I checked the loft, empty except for some old blankets. I looked for blood on the floor. Nothing. I was shaking by the time I made it back outside. Matt and Jake were waiting at the edge of the trees, looking terrified. "What happened?" Matt asked when I reached them. "Why did you go inside?" "I saw a woman stab herself," I said, my voice cracking. "But when I went inside, there was no one there." Jake grabbed my shoulders. "Tyler, are you having one of your episodes?" I shook my head violently. "No, I'm on my meds. I'm fine. And you guys heard the door and the crying too, right?" They both nodded reluctantly. "Something's not right here," I said. "That cabin was clean inside, like someone's been living there." "Let's just get out of here," Matt said, already backing away. "We can tell your dad about it when we get back." We practically ran back to the truck. None of us spoke on the drive home. I kept seeing the woman with the knife, replaying it in my mind. The way her arm moved, the glint of the blade, the horrible certainty of her movement. It wasn't random or chaotic. It was deliberate. When we got back to my house, Matt and Jake told my parents they weren't feeling well and left early the next morning. They haven't returned my calls since. I tried telling my parents what happened, but they assumed it was another hallucination. "You've been stressed about college," my mom said. "Maybe we should adjust your medication." But I know what I saw wasn't in my head. My cousins heard the sounds too. And there's no explanation for the hunting stand being in the wrong position or the cabin being so clean. I haven't been back to the farm since that day. I can't bring myself to go near it. Sometimes when I'm trying to fall asleep at night, I hear that door slam in my memory, followed by the sound of a woman crying. And I wonder who she was, why she did what she did, and why I was the only one who saw her. The worst part is, I keep thinking about what my uncle said, about leaving immediately if I ever heard strange noises in those woods. He knew something. He warned me, and I didn't listen. I don't know if I'll ever understand what happened that day at my great-grandfather's farm, but I know I'm never going back there. Some places hold on to things that should have been forgotten long ago, and sometimes those things want to be seen. Story 18. I've never told this story online before. Honestly, I've barely spoken about it with anyone other than my therapist. But it's been 8 years, and I still can't shake what happened that day in Blackwood Forest. Maybe writing it out will help. I was 15 when it happened. My family was big on mandatory fun, as my dad called it, these weekend outings where we all had to participate, no excuses. My sister Maya was 17 and always complaining about missing parties for our family hikes. My twin brothers Leo and Lucas were 10 and generally up for anything that involved getting muddy. That Saturday in October started normally enough. Mom made her usual hiking snacks, granola bars, apple slices, and those gross protein cookies Dad insisted were trail food. We packed our backpacks, filled our water bottles, and piled into our old SUV. The drive to Blackwood Forest was about an hour from our house, and I remember spending most of it with my headphones on, half listening to Maya complain about missing Brittany's Halloween party prep. "You'll thank us someday," Dad said for probably the 1,000th time in our lives. "Nature is the best teacher." Mom just smiled from the passenger seat, checking the trail map. "The weather's perfect today, not too hot, not too cold." It was actually a gorgeous day. The leaves were changing colors, all those reds and yellows, and there was that crisp smell in the air that only comes in autumn. I remember feeling pretty good when we arrived at the trailhead. The parking lot was about half full, so we wouldn't be completely alone on the trails, but it wouldn't be crowded either. We started on the main trail, the Oak Ridge Loop, which was marked with blue blazes on the trees. Dad led the way, with the twins right behind him, then Maya and me in the middle, and Mom bringing up the rear. We'd been on this trail before, maybe 2 or 3 times, but not recently. It was a moderate hike, about 5 miles total, with some nice views from the ridgeline. About an hour in, we stopped at a small clearing for a snack break. The twins were throwing pine cones at each other while Dad took pictures of some mushrooms he found interesting. Maya was complaining about not having cell service, and Mom was trying to spot birds with her little pocket binoculars. That's when Lucas noticed the side trail. "What's down there?" he asked, pointing to a narrow path branching off from the main trail. It wasn't marked with any blazes that I could see, just a small opening in the underbrush. Dad checked his map. It's not on here, probably just a game trail. And that should have been that. We should have stayed on the main trail. But then Leo said, "Can we check it out? Maybe there's a secret waterfall or something." Dad looked at Mom, that look they shared when they were deciding something. "Well, we're making good time. I suppose a little detour wouldn't hurt." Mom nodded. "Just a quick look. We need to be back at the car by 4. So we veered off the main trail and onto this narrow path. It was definitely less maintained, more overgrown, with branches we had to push aside and roots to step over. The twins thought this was great, of course, pretending they were explorers in uncharted territory. The path dipped down into a small ravine, and the temperature seemed to drop a few degrees. The trees were thicker here, blocking out more of the sunlight. I remember noticing how quiet it got. No more distant voices of other hikers, no birds chirping, just the sound of our footsteps on the leaves and the occasional snap of a twig. After about 10 minutes, the path opened up into another small clearing, maybe 30 feet across, and that's where we found it. The deer was lying on its side in the center of the clearing. At first glance, it looked like it was sleeping. It was a young doe, light brown with a white underbelly, but as we got closer, we could see it wasn't breathing. "Stay back, kids," Dad said, but it was too late. We'd all seen it. The deer's body was covered in marks, dozens of them, maybe more. Perfect X-shaped cuts, each about an inch across, carved into its hide in a precise pattern. They covered its flanks, its neck, even its face. The cuts weren't random. They were methodical, evenly spaced, almost deliberate. Some were still seeping blood, indicating this had happened very recently. There was no sign of predator attack, no indication that the deer had been hunted for food, just those X-shaped marks, carefully carved into its body with what must have been a sharp knife or razor. Mom gasped and quickly turned the twins away, but not before they'd seen it. Maya put her hand over her mouth, and Dad just stood there, staring. What happened to it?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Dad shook his head. "I don't know, but we need to leave. Now." That's when I felt it, the sensation of being watched. I glanced toward the trees surrounding the clearing, half expecting to see someone standing there, knife in hand. But there was nobody visible, just shadows and silence. Yet I knew with absolute certainty that we weren't alone. "Tom," Mom said, her voice tight with fear. She'd felt it too. "We need to go." Dad nodded, ushering us back toward the path. "Stay together. Walk, don't run." We moved back toward the main trail in a tight group. Nobody spoke. Even the twins, normally impossible to quiet down, were silent, glancing nervously over their shoulders. The forest suddenly felt hostile, the shadows deeper, the silence threatening. I kept thinking about those marks. They weren't random, they were a message of some kind. But who would do that, and why leave it where hikers might find it? The walk back to the main trail felt 10 times longer than the walk in. Every sound made us jump. A squirrel running up a tree, the wind rustling leaves. I kept feeling like someone was right behind us, just out of sight. When we finally reached the blue-blazed main trail, Dad picked up the pace, practically marching us toward the parking lot. We passed a few other hikers, and I remember how surreal it felt to exchange polite nods while carrying the secret of what we'd just seen. The drive home was silent for the most part. The twins sat in the back whispering to each other. Mom called the park ranger station on her cell phone once we had service, reporting what we'd found. Dad kept checking the rearview mirror. Maya finally broke the silence about halfway home. What kind of person would do that to an animal? Nobody had an answer. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those X-shaped marks. I kept wondering if the person who did it had been watching us the whole time, if they'd followed us back to the main trail, if they'd somehow followed us home. The next day, Mom got a call from the park ranger. They'd found the deer and removed it, but they had no leads on who might have done it. They suggested it might be teenagers or some kind of occult ritual, but those explanations felt hollow. I started researching online, looking for similar incidents. I found scattered reports, mutilated cattle in the Midwest, carved symbols on dead foxes in New England, ritualistic arrangements of dead rabbits in the Pacific Northwest. Nothing exactly like our deer, but enough to suggest this wasn't an isolated incident. The deeper I dug, the more uneasy I felt. There were forums dedicated to these kinds of animal mutilations, with people sharing theories ranging from government experiments to alien intervention to secret cults. None of it gave me any answers, just more questions and a growing sense of dread. We never really talked about it as a family after that first week. It was like we all silently agreed to pretend it hadn't happened. We still went on hikes, but never back to Blackwood Forest. And for months afterward, I noticed Dad always checked the locks twice before bed. The twins had nightmares for a while. I'd hear them crying sometimes in the middle of the night, and Mom would go comfort them. Maya started driving herself to school instead of walking, even though it was just a few blocks away. As for me, I developed this habit of constantly checking over my shoulder. Even now, 8 years later, I can't shake the feeling of being watched sometimes, and I dream about that deer maybe once a month. Only in my dreams, sometimes I'm the one covered in those X-shaped marks, lying in a clearing while shadowy figures stand over me. The rational part of my brain says it was probably just some sick person's idea of a joke or art project, maybe a hunter with mental issues or teenagers trying to scare people. But another part of me knows that doesn't explain the precision of those marks, the deliberate pattern, the fact that the deer was so fresh. Someone killed that animal, spent considerable time marking it in that specific way, and then either waited nearby to watch people find it or had just left when we arrived. Either option is terrifying. I'm 23 now, in my last year of college. I study ecology, ironically enough. My way of trying to make sense of the natural world, I guess. I've told this story to exactly 3 people: my therapist, my college roommate during a late-night confession session, and my boyfriend of 2 years. None of them had explanations either. What bothers me most isn't the grotesque image of the deer, though that's bad enough. It's the not knowing who did it or why, not knowing if they watched us find it, not knowing if it was meant as a warning or a message or something else entirely. Sometimes I find myself looking at strangers and wondering, was it you? Did you carve those marks? The butcher at the grocery store with his precise knife skills, the quiet neighbor who spends too much time in the woods, the art student with their interest in provocative installations. I realize this probably sounds paranoid. Maybe it is. But when you see something like that, something so deliberately wrong, it changes how you see everything else. It opens up possibilities you never considered before, none of them good. My family never reported the incident to the police, just the park rangers. I've often wondered if we should have done more, if somewhere out there reports are being collected about similar incidents that might form a pattern if only someone connected the dots. I check the news from that area occasionally, looking for any similar reports. So far, nothing exactly like our deer has surfaced publicly, but I can't help wondering if other families have stumbled across similar scenes and, like us, tried their best to forget about it, rather than speak it into wider existence. The X marks haunt me. What did they mean? Were they symbolic, territorial, a signature? I've never found any satisfactory explanation, despite years of occasional late-night research sessions. Whatever, or whoever, left that deer in the clearing that day is still out there. And sometimes, when I'm alone in the woods or walking home after dark, I swear I can feel them watching me still. Story 19. I've been meaning to share this for years, but honestly, I'm still not ready to fully process what happened. I guess writing it out might help me make sense of it. This happened back in 2008, and sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night thinking I hear footsteps outside my bedroom. I was 28 at the time, working as a software engineer in Seattle. My job was stressful. I was debugging code for a major project with impossible deadlines, and I desperately needed a break. I'd always loved the outdoors, and hiking solo had become my escape whenever work got overwhelming. Olympic National Park was my go-to place. The forests there are dense, magical almost, with moss hanging from ancient trees and that perpetual mist that makes everything feel otherworldly. I planned a 3-day trip, just me and nature. Looking back, I did everything right. I left my detailed itinerary with my sister Kate, including GPS coordinates of where I planned to camp each night. I packed more supplies than necessary: extra food, water purification tablets, first aid kit, emergency blanket, whistle, bear spray, the works. I even had a small satellite messenger that could send pre-programmed texts in case of emergency, though the reception out there was spotty at best. The day started perfectly. I arrived at the trailhead around 11 in the morning, parked my blue Honda Civic in the designated area, and took that obligatory selfie to send to Kate before I lost service. The weather was surprisingly good for Washington in April. Overcast but not raining, around 55 degrees. Perfect hiking weather. My destination was a somewhat secluded campsite near the Hoh River, about 6 miles from the main trail. The hike-in was rejuvenating, just what I needed after weeks of staring at a computer screen. I remember stopping to eat a peanut butter sandwich by a stream, taking photos of a family of deer, and feeling that deep sense of peace that only comes when you're completely disconnected from the digital world. I reached my campsite around 4 in the afternoon. It was beautiful. A small clearing surrounded by towering cedars and hemlocks with the sound of the river nearby. I set up my tent, a bright red 2-person North Face that I always used for solo trips. I liked the extra space, gathered firewood, and prepared my dinner. Freeze-dried pasta primavera that tasted way better in the wilderness than it had any right to. As darkness fell, I cleaned up carefully, hung my food bag from a tree about 100 yards from my tent, bears are no joke, and settled in for the night. I read a few chapters of the mystery novel I'd brought along before switching off my headlamp around 10. The forest was alive with normal night sounds. The river's constant rush, occasional owl hoots, the wind through the trees. I fell asleep feeling content and at peace. I woke up around midnight to what sounded like footsteps, not animal footsteps, human ones, deliberate, circling. At first I thought maybe it was another hiker who had arrived late and was looking for a spot to camp, but the footsteps never moved away. They just circled, sometimes coming closer to my tent, sometimes moving farther away. I lay completely still, barely breathing. There was no way someone had randomly stumbled upon my campsite. It was well off the main trail. I considered calling out but decided against it. Something felt wrong. Very wrong. The footsteps continued for what felt like hours, though my watch showed it was probably only 20 minutes or so. Then they stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the footsteps. I must have eventually fallen back asleep because the next thing I remember is jolting awake at what my watch said was 2:17 in the morning. A beam of light was sweeping across my tent. A flashlight. I froze, hoping whoever it was would just move on. Then a man's voice, low and controlled. "I know you're awake in there." My blood turned to ice. I didn't respond. "I've been watching you since you left your car. Blue Honda Civic, Washington plates. You ate a peanut butter sandwich by the creek around 1, took pictures of some deer, made pasta for dinner." He'd been following me the entire day, watching everything I did. My hands started shaking uncontrollably. "I just want to talk," he continued, his voice getting closer to the tent entrance. "I've been watching you for a while. You live in that apartment complex on West Lake, right? The one with the blue door?" That was my building. This wasn't a random encounter. This person knew me, had followed me from Seattle, knew where I lived. I reached for my backpack as quietly as possible, fumbling for my emergency whistle with trembling fingers. "I'm coming in now," he said, and I heard the zipper of my tent start to move. I blew the whistle as hard as I could, the piercing sound exploding in the quiet forest. Then I shouted, trying to make my voice sound confident despite my terror. "I have a weapon and I've already radioed the park rangers with my location. They're on their way now." Both were lies. I had bear spray, but it was in the side pocket of my backpack, and my satellite messenger couldn't make voice calls. But the whistle and my shouting seemed to work. I heard rapid footsteps retreating into the forest. I sat there in the dark, whistle still in my mouth, straining to hear any sound of his return. My entire body was shaking. I grabbed my phone even though I knew there was no service, clutching it like a lifeline. I considered packing up and running right then, but the thought of being in the pitch-black forest with him out there was even more terrifying than staying put. The next few hours were the longest of my life. Every sound made me jump. I held the bear spray in one hand and my knife in the other, eyes fixed on the tent entrance. I kept thinking about what he'd said. He knew where I lived. This wasn't just about tonight. Around 4:30 in the morning, I heard the footsteps return. Slower this time, more deliberate. They circled my tent once, twice, then stopped right outside the entrance. I held my breath, finger on the trigger of the bear spray. Then I heard it, the unmistakable sound of a knife cutting through fabric. He wasn't using the zipper this time. He was cutting his way into my tent from the side. I don't remember making the decision to run. It was pure instinct. I lunged for the tent entrance, unzipped it in one frantic motion, and burst out into the darkness. I heard a surprised grunt behind me as I sprinted blindly into the forest, away from the river, away from the trail. I had nothing with me. No flashlight, no phone, just the clothes I was sleeping in and the bear spray clutched in my right hand. I could hear him crashing through the underbrush behind me. He was calling out now, his voice a horrible mix of anger and excitement. "Where are you going? I just want to talk to you. Meredith." He knew my name. He knew my fucking name. I ran until my lungs burned, stumbling over roots and rocks in the darkness. The forest was pitch black under the canopy, but some primal instinct guided me. I could hear him getting closer. He had a flashlight, and I was essentially running blind. I came to a fallen tree, massive and ancient. There was a hollow space beneath it where the roots had been torn from the ground. Without thinking, I squeezed into the space, pressing myself as far back as I could go. The hollow was damp and smelled of rot and soil, but in that moment it felt like the safest place in the world. I heard him stop nearby, breathing hard. The beam of his flashlight swept across the forest floor, coming terrifyingly close to my hiding spot. I pressed my hand over my mouth to quiet my breathing. "Meredith?" he called, his voice softer now, coaxing. "I'm not going to hurt you. I just want to get to know you better. We have so much in common. I've been watching you for so long." He stayed there for what felt like hours, sometimes moving away, sometimes coming so close I could see his boots through the small opening of my hiding place. Eventually, the first gray light of dawn began to filter through the trees, and his footsteps retreated. I didn't move. I stayed in that hollow, shivering from cold and fear until full daylight. When I finally crawled out, my muscles screaming in protest, I had no idea where I was. I picked a direction that I thought might lead to the main trail and started walking, jumping at every sound. By some miracle, I found the trail around 8 in the morning. I was disoriented, dehydrated, and my feet were cut up from running barefoot through the forest. But I was alive. I started hiking as fast as I could toward the trailhead. About a mile down the trail, I ran into a group of day hikers, a middle-aged couple and their teenage son. I must have looked like a complete mess because they immediately stopped and asked if I was okay. I broke down, sobbing as I tried to explain what had happened. They gave me water and a spare jacket, and the father walked with me to the ranger station while his wife and son continued their hike. The rangers were responsive but not exactly surprised. They told me there had been reports of a man following solo female hikers in the area. They sent a team to my campsite while I gave my statement. When they returned, they confirmed my worst fears. My campsite had been completely ransacked. My backpack had been emptied, my clothes strewn about, my wallet was there, but all the photos had been removed from it, including my driver's license. My satellite messenger was smashed. The Rangers escorted me back to my car, which thankfully hadn't been tampered with. I drove straight to my sister's house in Tacoma, too afraid to return to my apartment. We filed a police report, but without any description of the man beyond male voice, there wasn't much they could do. I stayed with Kate for 2 weeks, jumping at every sound, barely sleeping. I changed the locks on my apartment, installed a security system, and even considered moving. I was starting to feel somewhat safer, thinking maybe it had just been some twisted person who got his thrills scaring women in the wilderness. Then, exactly 3 weeks after the incident, a package arrived at my apartment, no return address. Inside was my driver's license, the one that had been taken from my wallet at the campsite. Nothing else. No note, just my driver's license. The message was clear. He knew where I lived. He could have come for me, but instead, he was letting me know he was still watching. I moved the next day. I changed jobs, changed my phone number, deleted all social media. I even dyed my hair and started using my middle name. The police investigated but found nothing. The Rangers connected my case with several similar incidents across Washington and Oregon parks, speculating it might be a drifter who targeted solo female hikers, but no one was ever caught. It's been 15 years, and I still look over my shoulder. I still check the locks 3 times before bed. I've never gone camping alone again. Sometimes I wonder if he's still out there, still watching. Sometimes I feel eyes on me in a grocery store or walking to my car after work. The worst part isn't the fear, it's the not knowing who he was, why he chose me, whether he's still following me, not knowing if I'll ever truly be free of the feeling that somewhere, someone is watching me, waiting. Story 20. I've worked on cruise ships for about 6 years now, and honestly, it's been a pretty great gig overall. The pay isn't amazing, but you get to see the world, meet interesting people, and there's something kind of comforting about being at sea. At least, that's what I used to think before last summer. I was assigned to the Oceanic Voyager doing the South American route, Rio to Buenos Aires to Valparaiso and back. Beautiful ports, amazing scenery. I work in passenger services, mainly dealing with complaints, room changes, and general passenger assistance. Not the most glamorous job on board, but it keeps me busy. The ship itself is older, built in the late 90s but well maintained. It's got that classic cruise ship layout, central atrium with glass elevators, shops surrounding it, bars and restaurants on the lower decks, cabins above. Nothing unusual. About 2 months into my contract, I became friends with Eduardo, the gift shop manager. Eduardo was this big, loud Brazilian guy who'd been working ships for over 15 years. He ran the main gift shop on Deck 7, which sold everything from toothpaste to overpriced jewelry and tacky souvenirs. Eduardo was the kind of guy who'd slap you on the back hard enough to make you cough, but would also slip you free snacks from his shop inventory when supervisors weren't looking. We often hung out during our breaks or after shifts, sometimes grabbing a drink at the crew bar or just sitting on the aft deck watching the ocean and talking about nothing important. Pretty standard crew friendship. About 3 months into the contract, Eduardo started complaining about his staff. He said they were getting superstitious and it was annoying him. Some of them claimed they'd seen a little girl in the shop after hours when no children should be there. They'd find merchandise moved around or displays slightly altered in the mornings. At first, I thought it was just new crew members being dramatic. It happens a lot, especially with staff from more superstitious cultures. Eduardo would roll his eyes when telling me these stories. These new kids, man, they see a shadow and think it's a ghost. I tell them, you want scary? Try dealing with corporate when inventory doesn't match. He'd laugh it off, but I noticed he seemed genuinely irritated by it. Then, about a week after he first mentioned these incidents, Eduardo came to my cabin at around 2 in the morning. I was half asleep when I heard the knocking. When I opened the door, I honestly didn't recognize him for a second. His face was pale, his eyes red and puffy. Eduardo, this big, tough guy who I'd never seen fazed by anything, looked like he'd been crying. "Can I come in?" he asked, his voice shaky. I let him in immediately and offered him some water, which he gulped down like he hadn't had a drink in days. "What happened?" I asked, genuinely concerned. Eduardo was not the type to get emotional. He sat on my bed, hands trembling slightly. "I saw her," he said quietly. "The girl." I thought maybe he was drunk, but Eduardo didn't smell like alcohol. He looked genuinely terrified. He explained that he'd been doing inventory in his office behind the gift shop. It was after midnight, the shop was closed, and he was the only one there. The ship was in the middle of the ocean, halfway between Buenos Aires and Valparaiso. Most passengers were either asleep or in the casino or clubs. "I was counting the jewelry stock," he said, "when I felt cold, like suddenly freezing. I thought maybe the AC was malfunctioning, but then I heard this giggling, like a little kid." Eduardo said he called out, thinking maybe a child had somehow gotten into the closed shop. No response. He went out to check the main shop floor. Nothing. When he returned to his office, he sat back at his desk, facing the small mirror he kept on the wall to make the tiny space feel bigger. "That's when I saw her," he whispered. "In the mirror, a little girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old, dark hair in pigtails, white dress. She was standing behind me, smiling. But when I turned around," his voice cracked. "There was nobody there. When I looked back at the mirror, she was still there, still smiling. Then she put her finger to her lips, like shh, and faded away." Eduardo said he ran out of there immediately and went straight to his friend in the photography department, who let him sleep on his cabin floor. He was too scared to go back to his office or even to his own cabin, which was near the gift shop. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he was overtired. Maybe it was a trick of the light. Maybe he dozed off momentarily and dreamed it. But Eduardo was adamant. "I know what I saw," he said firmly. "I'm not crazy, and I wasn't asleep." The next day, Eduardo called in sick. This was completely out of character for him. In the months I'd known him, he'd never missed a shift, even when he had a terrible flu. I decided to check in with Paulo, one of the security supervisors I was friendly with. I casually mentioned Eduardo's story, framing it as concern for my friend's stress levels. Paulo's reaction surprised me. Instead of dismissing it, he got very quiet and asked me to come to his office. Once there, he closed the door and asked me exactly what Eduardo had seen. I told him, and Paulo sighed heavily. "This isn't the first time," he said. "We don't talk about it much because it scares the new crew and management doesn't like it, but there's a history with this ship." According to Paulo, about 20 years ago, when the ship was still fairly new, there was an incident involving a young girl named Sofia. She was 7 years old, traveling with her parents from Rio to Buenos Aires. One evening, during the captain's dinner, Sofia got bored and wandered off while her parents were socializing. Security footage showed her running playfully through the gift shop on deck 7, then out into the atrium area. What happened next wasn't entirely clear, but somehow Sofia climbed onto the railing overlooking the central atrium. Whether she was playing or trying to see something below, or was just a curious child, no one knows. But she fell. 7 decks down to the atrium floor. She died instantly. It was a huge tragedy, Paulo said. The company settled with the family, redesigned all the railings to be higher and more secure, and tried to move on. But ever since then, there have been incidents. Paulo told me that over the years, multiple crew members had reported similar experiences. Hearing a child's laughter in empty corridors, seeing a small shadow moving in peripheral vision, objects in the gift shop being moved overnight. And most notably, the elevators. The glass elevators in the atrium sometimes move on their own, Paulo said. Security gets calls about this every few months. The elevators will go up and down without anyone inside them, and they always stop at deck 7, where Sofia was last seen alive. Maintenance had checked the elevator systems multiple times, but could never find any mechanical explanation. ET had reviewed the computer systems controlling them, but everything was normal. Yet it kept happening. Paolo showed me some incident reports, vague of course, written in technical language about elevator malfunctions and environmental anomalies, but reading between the lines, it was clear what was happening. The ship had a ghost, Sophia's ghost. Most of the long-term crew know about it, Paolo admitted. We just don't talk about it openly. Bad for morale, bad for business if passengers found out. Management likes to pretend it's not happening. I left Paolo's office feeling uneasy. I've never been particularly superstitious or believed in ghosts, but there was something about the matter-of-fact way Paolo discussed it, combined with Eduardo's genuine terror, that made me wonder. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Sophia, this little girl who just wanted to play and ended up dying so tragically. I wondered if she was confused, if she knew she was dead, if she was looking for her parents, or just continuing to play the game she loved in life. Around 3 in the morning, I gave up on sleep and decided to take a walk. The ship was quiet, just a few passengers stumbling back to their cabins from the late-night venues. I found myself drawn to the atrium. I took the stairs, not the elevator, and made my way to deck 7. The gift shop was dark, closed until morning. I stood outside it, feeling slightly ridiculous. What was I doing? Looking for a ghost? I was about to turn away when I felt it, a distinct cold spot, right in front of the shop entrance. The kind of cold that doesn't make sense in a climate-controlled environment. And then I heard it, very faint but unmistakable, a child's giggle, coming from inside the dark shop. My heart started racing. I peered through the glass doors but couldn't see anything unusual. Just as I was convincing myself it was my imagination, I saw movement inside, a small shadow darting between display racks. I practically ran to the security office. The night guard was half asleep but woke up when I rushed in. "I need to see the gift shop camera," I said breathlessly. He looked at me strangely but pulled up the feed. The shop was empty, no movement, no shadows, nothing out of place. "Are you sure this is live?" I asked. He nodded. "Timestamp right there," he pointed. Sure enough, it was showing the current time. I must have looked crazy because the guard asked if I was feeling okay. I mumbled something about being overtired and left quickly. On my way back to my cabin, I had to pass the atrium again. That's when I saw it. One of the glass elevators was moving. No passengers inside, no crew, just an empty elevator going up, then down, then stopping precisely at deck 7. The doors opened, stayed open for about 10 seconds, then closed. The elevator didn't move again. I stood frozen, watching. As the doors closed, I swear I heard that same giggle echo through the atrium. The next few weeks were strange. Eduardo came back to work but requested a schedule change so he wouldn't have to close the shop alone. He didn't want to talk about what happened anymore. I started noticing things I'd previously overlooked. The way some veteran crew members would avoid certain areas at night, how they'd make small, almost unconscious gestures, crossing themselves, touching wood, little protective rituals when passing the spot where Sophia fell. The way no one ever mentioned her name, as if speaking it might summon her. One night, I was working late at the passenger services desk. A little girl, about 7 years old, came up to me. She asked if I'd seen her friend Sophia. She said they were playing hide and seek, but she couldn't find her anywhere. Before I could respond, the girl's mother rushed up, apologizing for her daughter wandering off. When I asked the mother about Sophia, she looked confused and said they didn't know anyone by that name on board. "I've transferred to a different ship now. I requested it at the end of my contract. The company didn't ask questions. Crew requests transfers all the time. But I know why I left, even if I can't explain it to anyone. Sometimes I still dream about her. This little girl in pigtails and a white dress playing eternally on a cruise ship, not understanding why no one will play with her anymore. I wonder if she's still there, giggling in the gift shop after hours, riding the elevators up and down, looking for someone to play with. I don't know if I believe in ghosts. I don't know if what I experienced was real or just the power of suggestion after hearing Eduardo's story. But I do know that Eduardo was genuinely terrified by what he saw. This tough guy who'd laugh off almost anything was reduced to tears and trembling, and I know what I heard and saw that night in the atrium. Sometimes I think about reaching out to Sophia's parents. They must be middle-aged now. Do they know? Can they feel that their daughter is still somehow present, playing games on that ship? Would it bring them comfort or more pain? I'll never go back to the oceanic Voyager. But sometimes, when I'm on a different ship and I pass a glass elevator or hear a child laughing, I can't help but think of Sophia, and I wonder if she's still trying to find someone to play with on Deck Story 21. I still can't sleep well, even though it's been 2 weeks since that night in the woods. Every little sound outside my bedroom window makes me jolt awake, heart racing. I've been camping my whole life, but now I'm questioning if I'll ever feel comfortable in the wilderness again. It was supposed to be a normal family camping trip. My wife Sarah, our 2 kids, Emma is 9, Jake is 7, and our German Shepherd mix, Remy. We'd found this perfect spot about 3 hours from home, in a national forest where dispersed camping is allowed. No designated campgrounds, no other people for miles, just us and nature. We'd been there twice before without any issues. That day had been perfect. We'd hiked to a small waterfall in the morning. The kids splashed in the creek all afternoon, and I got the campfire going as the sun started to set. Sarah made her famous foil packet potatoes and we roasted hot dogs over the flames. Normal camping stuff. The kids were exhausted from all the hiking and swimming, so Sarah took them to the tent around 9:30. "You coming?" she asked before zipping up the tent. "In a bit," I told her. "Just want to enjoy the fire a little longer." Remy stayed with me, curled up near my feet as I sat in my camp chair. It was one of those perfect mountain nights. Crisp air, absolute silence except for the crackling fire, and stars like you wouldn't believe. No moon that night, which made the stars even brighter. I remember leaning back in my chair, looking up at the Milky Way, and feeling that sense of peace you can only get when you're miles from civilization. I'd been sitting there maybe 20 minutes after Sarah and the kids went to bed. The fire was burning down a bit, so I tossed another log on. That's when I noticed Remy had changed. She'd been totally relaxed, but suddenly she was sitting upright, ears forward, body rigid. At first, I thought maybe she'd heard a squirrel or raccoon. She's always alert to wildlife. But this was different. Her posture was tense in a way I'd never seen before. Then came the growl. Not the playful growl she does when we're roughhousing, but a deep, rumbling sound that seemed to come from her chest. The hair along her spine stood straight up. "What is it, girl?" I whispered, sitting up straighter myself. Her eyes were locked on the tree line to our left, maybe 40 feet from where we were sitting. The light from the fire didn't reach that far, and beyond our little circle of light was just darkness, pure, absolute darkness. I reached for my flashlight, one of those heavy-duty ones that can illuminate stuff a good distance away. My hand was already a little shaky as I clicked it on and pointed it toward where Remy was staring. At first, I didn't see anything, just trees, underbrush, normal forest stuff. I swept the beam back and forth a few times, thinking maybe whatever had caught Remy's attention had moved on. Then I saw them. 2 eyes, reflecting the flashlight beam with that yellowish-green shine that animal eyes get. They were about 2 feet off the ground, and my first thought was fox, or maybe coyote. We'd heard coyotes the previous nights, yipping in the distance, but as I held the beam steady on those eyes, my blood went cold. The eyes slowly rose upward from 2 feet off the ground to about 3.5 feet. Whatever this was had been crouching, and now it was standing up. As it moved, the light revealed more details. The long, muscular body, the broad shoulders, the smooth, rope-like tail that curled slightly at the end. There was no mistaking what I was looking at. A mountain lion, a full-grown cougar, standing about 100 yards from our camp, staring directly at me and my dog. I'd always known mountain lions lived in these woods. Rangers had mentioned it during previous trips, but they'd always emphasized how rare sightings were. They avoid humans, they'd said. You could spend your whole life in mountain lion territory and never see one. Well, I was seeing one now, and it was seeing me. I froze completely. Every instinct told me to run to the tent, grab my family, and somehow get to safety. But I knew running was exactly what you're not supposed to do with predators. Remy stood beside me, still growling that deep warning growl. I wanted to quiet her, afraid she might provoke the cat, but I couldn't find my voice. The mountain lion didn't move, it just watched us. Its eyes never left mine, even as I stood there with my flashlight beam pointed directly at its face. Time seemed to stretch and warp. It might have been 30 seconds or 5 minutes. I genuinely couldn't tell you. Finally, in a movement so deliberate it seemed almost casual, the mountain lion slowly turned its head away. It took a few steps toward the deeper woods, and within seconds it had vanished completely. The darkness swallowed it, as if it had never been there at all. I kept scanning the woods with my flashlight for what felt like hours, my heart still hammering in my chest. My mouth was completely dry, and I realized I'd been holding my breath. Remy stayed alert beside me, ears twitching at every sound, eyes fixed on the spot where the mountain lion had disappeared. I sat back down in my chair, legs too shaky to keep standing, but I couldn't relax, not even slightly. I added more logs to the fire, building it up bigger than we usually would. The extra light and heat provided some small comfort, but my eyes never stopped scanning the darkness beyond our camp. Every shadow looked like a crouching predator. Every rustle in the underbrush made my stomach clench. I checked my watch, only 11:30. Hours until daylight. I considered waking Sarah, packing up in the dark and trying to hike back to our truck, but the thought of moving through those woods at night, knowing what was out there, seemed even more terrifying than staying put. So I stayed by the fire, feeding it constantly, keeping it as bright as possible. Remy remained vigilant, occasionally growling at sounds I couldn't hear. At some point I grabbed the camp axe and kept it across my lap. What I thought I was going to do with it against a mountain lion, I don't know, but holding something solid made me feel marginally better. Around 2 in the morning, I finally forced myself to go to the tent. My eyes were burning from staring into the darkness for so long, and I knew I needed at least some rest. I zipped the tent carefully behind me, knowing full well that the thin nylon would provide zero protection if the mountain lion decided to come back. Sarah and the kids were sleeping peacefully. I lay down fully clothed, with my flashlight and the axe beside me. Remy curled up at my feet, still alert. Every time she perked up her ears or lifted her head, my heart would start racing again. I must have dozed off eventually, because the next thing I knew, early morning light was filtering through the tent walls. The relief I felt was overwhelming. I've never been so happy to see daylight in my life. I decided not to tell the kids about what had happened. No need to scare them. I did tell Sarah, in whispers as we packed up camp, and she went pale. "We're never camping here again," she said. I just nodded. The hike back to our truck was tense. I kept the kids and Remy close, constantly scanning the forest around us. Every crack of a twig made me jump. We made it back without incident, and as we drove away, I kept thinking about how differently things could have gone. But what really keeps me up at night isn't just the encounter itself, it's the realization that the mountain lion only revealed itself because Remy detected it. How long had it been watching us before that moment? How close had it gotten while we were all asleep the previous nights? And the most unsettling thought of all, how many times had I been watched by mountain lions during all my previous camping trips without ever knowing they were there? I've been camping my entire life, since I was a kid going with my dad. I've always felt at home in the wilderness. But now I can't shake the feeling that I've never truly been alone out there. That just beyond the reach of my flashlight or campfire, there have always been eyes watching, calculating, assessing. We're heading to a busy established campground next month, the kind with ranger stations and dozens of other campers around. Sarah thinks it'll help me ease back into feeling comfortable outdoors again. Maybe she's right, but I know one thing for certain. I'll never again sit alone by a campfire without wondering what might be watching me from the darkness, and I'll never again take for granted the warning growl of my dog, who likely saved us that night from something much worse than just a frightening encounter. Sometimes I still catch myself staring out into my backyard at night, scanning the tree line with a flashlight, half expecting to see those eyes staring back at me. I know it's irrational. We live in a suburban neighborhood, miles from any wilderness area, but that feeling of being watched, of being hunted, it doesn't just go away because you're back in civilization. Story 22. I still get chills thinking about our old apartment in Somerville. It's been over 20 years, but some things you just can't forget, no matter how much you wish you could. James and I were newlyweds back in 2000, and honestly, we were so excited to start our life together. The apartment wasn't anything special, just a two-bedroom on the second floor of this older building. The rent was reasonable, and we were young and broke, so it seemed perfect. Looking back, I should have paid more attention to why it was so affordable compared to everything else in the area. The first few weeks were totally normal. We were busy unpacking, arranging furniture, and just enjoying being married. James worked at the bank downtown, and I was finishing up my degree in nursing. About a month after moving in, we decided to adopt 2 cats from the local shelter, a grey tabby male we named Oscar and a calico female we called Moxie. They were both about a year old and already bonded, so we took them both. That's when things started getting weird. The spare bedroom became their room at night. We'd close them in there with their beds, litter box, and water so they wouldn't wake us up at the crack of dawn. That room shared a wall with our headboard. Every single night, around 3 in the morning, I'd wake up to this metallic tapping sound coming from inside that wall. Tap, 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 pause, tap, tap, tap. It was rhythmic, almost like someone was trying to communicate. I'd wake James up sometimes, and he'd hear it too. We thought maybe it was the cats playing with something, but when we'd check, they'd be sound asleep. We considered pipes, but the sound was too deliberate, too consistent. Always 3 taps, always at 3 in the morning. One night in November, we decided to just let the cats roam free overnight. I was exhausted from studying for finals and couldn't handle another 3 a.m. wake-up call. Around midnight, we were both almost asleep when we heard this enormous crash from the kitchen. It sounded like every dish we owned had fallen to the floor. The cats knocked over the drying rack, James mumbled, half asleep. I groaned, picturing the mess. We'll clean it in the morning. Here's the thing. When we got up the next day, nothing was out of place. Not a single dish on the floor. In fact, all the dishes that had been in the drying rack were neatly put away in the cabinets. James looked at me, confused. "Did you put these away last night?" he asked. "No." "Did you?" "No." We kind of laughed it off, both assuming the other had done it and forgotten. But deep down, I knew I hadn't touched those dishes, and from the look on James's face, I knew he hadn't either. The weird stuff kept happening. Items we'd leave in one place would be somewhere completely different the next day. The TV would turn on by itself. Doors we'd definitely closed would be wide open. We'd joke about our ghost roommate, but it didn't feel like a joke. The most terrifying incident happened on a Friday night in January. It was freezing outside, and we were curled up on the couch watching some movie. Both cats were lounging nearby, Oscar on the floor and Moxie on the armchair. Suddenly, both cats sat bolt upright, staring intensely at the same spot under the window. Their bodies went completely rigid, eyes fixed, fur standing on end. "What are they looking at?" I whispered. James shrugged and nudged Oscar with his foot. The cat didn't move, not even a twitch. He stayed frozen, staring at that empty spot. I got goosebumps all over my arms. I reached over and picked up Moxie, but her body remained stiff as a board in my arms. Her eyes never moved from whatever she was seeing. I can't explain how unnatural it felt, like holding a cat statue. Her chest was barely moving, though I could feel her heart racing against my hand. James got up and walked toward the spot they were staring at. "There's nothing here, guys," he said. but I could hear the tension in his voice. Then he kicked his foot through the air where they were looking. The second he did that, both cats instantly relaxed. Oscar stretched and wandered into the kitchen. Moxie jumped out of my arms and followed him, both acting completely normal, like nothing had happened. James and I just stared at each other, speechless. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept feeling like something was watching me from the corner of the room. When I closed my eyes, I could see it, a solid dark figure, maybe 4 feet tall, standing at the foot of our bed. It wasn't exactly human-shaped, more like a dense shadow with a vaguely rounded top. I'd snap my eyes open and nothing would be there, but the feeling of being watched remained. I never told James about this. I thought I was just freaking myself out. Little did I know he was experiencing the same thing. Sometimes I'd wake up and find him sleeping on the couch. He'd mumble something about not being able to sleep, but I could tell there was more to it. Another strange thing I noticed was Oscar's behavior whenever one of us had to use the bathroom at night. That hallway was always pitch black. The apartment had terrible lighting. Oscar would jump up the second either of us got out of bed and walk with us to the bathroom, waiting outside until we were done, then escort us back to the bedroom, every single time, without fail. I thought it was just a quirky cat thing. Winter turned to spring, and things seemed to settle down a bit. The tapping still happened occasionally, but we'd gotten used to it. The cats still had moments where they'd stare at empty spaces, but nothing as extreme as that January night. Then came the incident that finally broke us. It was around 2 in the morning in April, and I woke up to the sound of whispering. Not the tapping, but actual whispers. They seemed to be coming from every direction at once. The walls, the ceiling, under the bed. I couldn't make out any words, just this constant stream of hushed voices. I reached over to wake James, but his side of the bed was empty. My heart started racing. The whispers got louder, more insistent. I called out for him, but no answer. The bedroom door was closed, which was odd because we always left it open for the cats. I sat up, trying to gather the courage to get out of bed, when I noticed something dark moving along the wall. Not a shadow cast by anything. It was moving independently, creeping along the wall like some kind of liquid darkness. It was heading toward the corner where I'd often sensed that presence. My whole body went cold. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. The dark mass pooled in the corner, gradually taking shape. That same 4-foot figure I'd glimpsed before. This time I wasn't imagining it. This time it was really there. Just as I thought I might pass out from fear, the bedroom door burst open and James rushed in, flipping on the light. The figure vanished instantly. James was pale, shaking. "There was something in the living room," he said, his voice barely audible, "standing over the cats. They were frozen again, just like before. We spent the rest of the night with all the lights on, sitting back to back so nothing could sneak up on either of us. By morning we were already looking for a new place to live. We moved out 2 weeks later. We never told the landlord why, just said we found a place closer to my school. The day we left, both cats seemed almost relieved, meowing and pacing by the door like they couldn't wait to get out. The strangest part? As soon as we moved to our new apartment, Oscar stopped his escort service to the bathroom. First night there, I got up to pee, and he just stayed curled up on the bed, not even lifting his head. It was like he knew we were safe now. Years later, around 2007, James and I were watching some documentary about Native American legends. They were talking about this entity known to tribes in the Carolinas, a dark, malevolent spirit that attached itself to places where something traumatic had occurred. They described it as a shadow figure, typically about 4 feet tall, that would manifest in corners or near windows. James and I both froze. The documentary showed an artist's rendering of the entity, and it was exactly what we'd seen in our apartment. Exactly. The program went on to explain how the entity would often manipulate objects, create noises to disturb residents, and had a particular interest in animals, sometimes freezing them in place with its presence. It was like someone had taken our experience and put it on TV. We started talking over the program, comparing notes on all the things we'd never told each other. How he'd seen the figure too, how he'd sleep on the couch because he couldn't stand being in the bedroom, how I'd feel like something was watching me in the shower. We got so caught up in our conversation that we missed the name of the entity and what the documentary said about getting rid of it. All we caught was that it was considered evil and dangerous by the tribes who knew of it. To this day, I don't know what shared our first home with us. I don't know if it was that same entity from the documentary or something else entirely. I don't know if it's still there, tormenting some other young couple. Sometimes I think about driving by the old place, but something always stops me. Maybe it's fear that seeing the building will somehow reconnect us to whatever was there. All I know is that both James and I still get uneasy in dark corners. We still sleep with a small light on, and sometimes when I'm home alone, I swear I hear that familiar tap, tap, tap coming from inside the walls.